Good morning. On today's show, major incidents have been declared as severe flooding and further snow threatens to bring another day of chaos for people across the country.
Are gas prices going to rise this year? Why fears are growing across Europe with the continent effectively rationing gas? We'll speak to the former chief executive of UK Energy.
And a row is growing in the Commons after the Prime Minister accused people of spreading lies over grooming gangs.
It's Tuesday, the 7th of January. Your headlines. More than 200 flood warnings remain in place across England this morning. An earthquake in a mountainous region of western China kills at least 53 people. A crackdown on sexually explicit deepfakes could see predators face up to 2 years in jail. A polar vortex brings chaos to the US as 7 states declare emergencies in response to the winter storm. And France marks the 10th anniversary of the Charlie Hebdo attack with a series of memorials across Paris. A very good morning to you. Our top story, 300 flood alerts and more than 200 flood warnings remain in place across England this morning. A severe danger to life warning has also been issued for parts of northern Leicestershire as the UK continues to be battered by bad weather. Well, parts of the country have widespread travel chaos, power cuts, with children needing to be rescued after being stranded at school surrounded by floodwater. Let's bring in Sky's Alice Porter, who's been covering all of this closely for us over the last 48 hours. How bad is it?
It's a situation that's really escalating very quickly. We've got 203 flood warnings in place. That's 4 more than an hour ago. So this is something that is very fast moving. And the worry is we've got this severe flood warning in place, which, as you were saying there, means there is a threat to life. And this has been put in place in North Leicestershire by the Environment Agency, they say, because of large-scale evacuations which are required. And we know 59 people were evacuated from their homes in the area yesterday. So this weather is really starting to impact people, communities and services. We've got, for the first time ever, East Midlands Ambulance Service have declared a critical incident. Now, that won't just be because of the flooding. That's also, we've got winter pressures. But if you've got a situation where ambulances simply cannot get to people in need because of rising flood water, that's going to put an additional strain on a service at a really, really difficult time of year, hence why they've declared that critical incident. And we know, sadly, yesterday, there was a body of a man was recovered in the North Yorkshire area. We don't quite yet know how he died, but particularly with the water that is on a lot of the areas, the flood water there, if temperatures dip, that could make an additional risk, and so the authorities really are concerned about it.
You mentioned Leicestershire there, North Yorkshire. Break it down regionally for us. Where is it worse and where is it not too bad?
Well, the good news is that, unlike yesterday where we had those yellow weather warnings in place, they were in place in pretty much the whole of the UK. What we're seeing today is a slightly different picture. The good news, if you're in the southeast, the east side, Hull, Newcastle, there's no weather warnings in place. So the good news if you're there. Not such good news if you're in Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, the southwest. That's where those 3 yellow weather warnings are in place. But this, as I was saying, this is a fast-moving situation. By tomorrow, there is a yellow weather warning in place for snow and rain, and that's only along the south coast, nowhere else in the country. So I think really we're getting a sense there that everybody in the UK is going to be impacted by this really difficult weather at some point over the next 24 hours.
Alice, as always, thanks so much. Keep us posted on the developments. Alice Porter there. Now, the Prime Minister has accused people of spreading lies about grooming gangs and claims they aren't interested in the victims after Elon Musk accused Keir Starmer of being complicit in the scandal. Serena is here to tell us more on this. And Serena, the other development, of course, yesterday is that the Conservatives are now trying to push this forward to a critical moment in Parliament and a vote.
Yeah, both of those are true. I mean, we spoke about it yesterday in some length, but if you look at the papers this morning, that headline is still dominating. It's still a row, essentially, and now 2 people are involved because the Prime Minister has directly condemned these erratic tweets that are still incoming overnight from Elon Musk. Now, I think the Prime Minister decided yesterday to directly address this. He talked about, there needs to be an anchor of truth. He wants to lead on public standards. That was something he talked about in the general election, and now he's really sticking by that. But if you look at the words, they were quite robust. He says that Elon Musk is peddling poison of the far right. And as you say, with the Conservatives, he said, some people are jumping on the bandwagon simply to get attention. Now, this is all, of course, because of the grooming gang scandals that were around 2011, 2013. And as a result, there was this national report, the Alexis J report. What the government are doing now is they're saying one of the recommendations from that report they will implement in the spring. So Yvette Cooper in the House yesterday said she stood up in the House and said there will be mandatory reporting. So anyone who works with children, they have to report any allegations of child abuse, and if they won't, there will be severe punishments for that. But as you say, the Conservatives have pushed back very strongly on this, and they say that they've interpreted the Prime Minister's words as saying if anyone who doesn't want to look into another national inquiry, they're saying he's accusing them of somehow being far right. So this row is ongoing.
And Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, will join us at 9:15 a.m. to discuss this. We'll also be joined from someone from the Justice Department of the government, the Victims Minister, Alex Davis-Jones, in 5 or 10 minutes' time. But the government wants to be talking about something slightly different today.
Yes, so they want to be talking about this new penalty for deepfakes. So this is sort of AI-generated images that are hyper-realistic, and they distort reality in the sense that you could see an image and think it's real, but it's very much not. It's very much created and distorted. And there hasn't been a specific offence for this. The government are bringing that in, and the penalty could be up to about 2 years. So it's quite a high penalty, depending on what the exact specific crime has been. But this is a specific crime for that because, of course, victims are online. 1 in 3 women are victims of online abuse, so it's quite high.
Well, Alex Davis-Jones, the Victims Minister from the Justice Department, will join us to discuss that and, of course, the grooming scandal at 7:15. And, as I said, Robert Jenrick at 9:15. For now, Serena, thanks so much. Now, Christmas, one of the busiest times of the year for shopping, but purses appear to have tightened due to the cost of living crisis. Spending wasn't as high as retailers would have hoped. Let's get more on the details, which have just crossed. Business correspondent Paul Kelso has them for us. Paul, on the surface, they looked quite good, but when you break it down, it's perhaps less attractive than it would have been.
Yeah, this is an assessment of the sales figures from the British Retail Consortium, which represents shops on high streets around the country. And while sales grew in what they call the golden quarter, the 3 months culminating in December in the Christmas shopping period, by 0.4%. Below that figure, that's largely driven by food sales. Non-food sales in the 3 months leading up to Christmas contracted year on year at the end of last year, so down 1.5%. And the BRC says this is largely down to people managing their finances carefully, given the wider pressures on household economics. So it's a pretty gloomy picture coming from the BRC, and they say things are not likely to look up in the new year, given the pressures that they are going to come under as a result primarily of the Chancellor's budget, which will see national insurance contributions by businesses increase heftily. There'll also be an increase in the minimum wage, which many people working in shops, retail, are paid. So an increase across the board, they say, of around £7 billion in costs to retailers, and they'll have no choice, very little chance of recovering that, and no choice but to pass that on in price increases. So gloomy message from the retailers about their prospects, perhaps gloomy for consumers too, if prices are going to rise further. This is, of course, a picture for the entire industry. Companies that get it right can still do well, and we've had a trading update from Next, which has been the shining light of how to run a retail business over the last few years, and they've actually increased their full-year profit figures on the back of a very healthy Christmas period, which had exceeded their expectations. Their sales ran at 5.7% in the 9 weeks leading up to Christmas. That was nearly double what they'd forecast. So it does show that if you can get the balance right, and what Next does well is offer an online business for multiple brands as well as sell its own branded goods through its stores. If you get it right, you can flourish in this environment. But the wider message from retail is that is increasingly difficult to do with the balance between the difficult economic conditions, the continuing cost of living squeeze that people have faced in the last year, which means perhaps we've been more circumspect when it comes to how much to splurge at Christmas. But they're perhaps more worried looking into the next year and beyond, and they're not the first business group to say that in this short new year already, that the impact of government measures, the budget specifically, is going to weigh heavily on business, and that doesn't make for a particularly rosy picture as we head into 2025.
Paul Kelso, as always, thanks so much. We'll be discussing that more later on in the show too. But first, all of the day's other stories. Leah's back with that.
Thank you, Wilfred. Morning, everyone. At least 53 people have died after a strong earthquake hit Tibet in western China. This is near to Nepal. Let's get more on this. Our Asia correspondent, Nicole Johnston, has been following developments. Nicole, morning to you. What do we know? What's the latest?
Well, it's a very serious earthquake. It struck in the autonomous region of Tibet around 9 a.m. in the morning, a 6.8 magnitude earthquake, and it hit the county of Tingri, near one of the holy cities there. As you said, the death toll so far, 53 people. Dozens of people have been injured, though, so we would expect that the number of people killed will increase. Pictures are starting to come out on social media of houses and buildings. Shops, of course, destroyed, a great deal of rubble. So a lot of concern in that region right now. 1,500 Chinese search and rescue workers are in the region. And this all took place, of course, in the heart of the Himalayas. It's a region that is well known for earthquakes. There's been at least a dozen over the last 100 years or so. And the other big factor is 27 villages are in that region. So, of course, concerned that that death toll will increase. A lot of tectonic plates there as well. It's where the main tectonic plates of Eurasia collide. We're also hearing that the tremors have been felt outside of Tibet, also in Nepal, Bhutan, and in India as well. But the other worry, of course, is the memory of a big earthquake in Nepal around a decade ago. 9,000 people were killed. So any time that you hear of tremors or earthquakes in the Himalayas, it immediately brings back those memories. And that's why people are paying very close attention to what's happening in that western region of China right now.
OK, Nicole, for now, thank you. We'll cross to the United States now. At least 7 states have declared an emergency as a winter storm causes widespread chaos. Storm Blair has swept eastwards across the country, leaving what the National Weather Service called the heaviest snowfall in at least a decade. And extreme weather is forecast to continue for days. Sky's David Blevins has this report.
It's the worst winter storm to hit the United States in a decade, the Midwest bearing the brunt of the blizzard. The snow reached Washington, blanketing a region 30 states wide. That placed 60 million Americans under a weather alert, 7 states forced to declare an emergency. Hundreds of flights were either cancelled or delayed, and with train services disrupted too, the National Weather Service advised people to avoid all but essential travel. They're used to snow here in the capital, but not this amount of it. In most parts of the district, it's 6 inches deep. And some isolated areas are recording 12 inches. That's a foot of snow they're commuting through. That requires ingenuity. Some found a way to reach their destination, while others had their hands full making the most of the winter wonderland. There's a winter weather alert across 30 states, and here you are building a snowman. What inspired you to do that today?
Well, when snowing in DC, right?
We're both from Florida, and so this is like our first snow ever, and so we just needed to really take advantage of it.
I'm from California. We very rarely get snow, and so when I get snow, not by choice, I decide to have fun with it.
Honestly, it's been very nice, very peaceful. I don't mind it.
Get ready! Charge!
With federal government and schools shut, dozens faced off in what's become an annual tradition, countering the chill with a great snowball battle on Meridian Hill. David Blevins, Sky News in Washington.
UK ambulance services are on course to report the highest ever rate of violent and abusive incidents against their staff. The Association of Ambulance Chief Executives says at least 55 paramedics are abused or attacked every day, with incidents including physical and verbal abuse, sexual assaults and serious attacks involving weapons. People who create sexually explicit deep fakes could face up to 2 years behind bars under new laws designed to protect victims, who are usually women or girls. It'll also become an offence to take intimate images of a person without consent. Events marking the 10-year anniversary on the attack on French satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo will be held in Paris today. 12 people died in the newsroom massacre. French President Emmanuel Macron will be among those paying tribute to victims, while a special edition of Charlie Hebdo has been released. Donald Trump has lost his bid to postpone sentencing for his hush money conviction. The US president-elect's lawyers argue that his election victory should conclude the case, but a New York judge confirmed his sentencing will go ahead on Friday as scheduled. Still, giants Tata and British will join a new government council aimed at rebuilding the industry. It follows recent job losses and predictions of more as companies switch to greener furnaces. The council will also consult on how to spend £2 billion of new investment.
There, thank you. Well, the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, has announced his resignation amid growing turmoil in his party. The 53-year-old has led the ruling Liberal Party since 2013 and the country since 2015. But is facing increasing calls to step down amid poor opinion polls and high-profile resignations. Here's our international correspondent, Diana Magnay.
And so, after 9 years as Prime Minister, a momentous announcement from Canada's Justin Trudeau.
Canadians deserve a real choice in the next election, and it has become obvious to me with the internal battles that I cannot be the one to carry the Liberal standard into the next election.
A familiar face on the international circuit, the longest standing of the current G7 crew. Justin Trudeau championed Ukraine, the climate and liberal values, which saw him come in with a strong mandate in 2015, but is not what voters want now.
Prime Minister, was there a productive meeting with President-elect?
It was an excellent conversation.
Especially not with Donald Trump threatening a 25% tariff on all Canadian goods and trolling the Canadian leader as just another governor of a US state. Trump tweeting on Truth Social after their meeting last month, "It was a pleasure to have dinner the other night with Governor Justin Trudeau of the great state of Canada. I look forward to seeing the governor again soon so that we may continue our in-depth talks on tariffs and trade." He grew up as Canadian political royalty, son of a revered Prime Minister, meeting the Queen first as a 5-year-old.
Rather different circumstances.
Yes, I will say you were much taller than me the last time we met.
But his political star could not outshine the economic crunch from COVID. And in December last year, the sudden resignation of his finance minister dealt a final blow. Chrystia Freeland charging the government in the face of Trump's trade threats with costly political gimmicks, which make Canadians doubt that we recognise the gravity of the moment. The opposition Conservatives now hold a huge lead in the polls. Justin Trudeau left with these words for his rivals.
Stopping the fight against climate change doesn't make sense. Backing off on the values and strength in diversity that Canada has always worked to pull itself together on is not the right path for the country.
But with his popularity in shreds, he has concluded that the political path forward is not for him to tread.
Do you think it's irresponsible to resign? Why not earlier?
Diana Magnay, Sky News.
Let's get more now on the news that people create and share sexually explicit deepfakes will soon face up to 2 years in jail and speak to the Victims Minister, Alex Davies-Jones. Very good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning.
I want to get on to the deepfake story in a moment, but start with the news that's still dominating all of the front pages, and that's the grooming scandal and the back and forth between the parties and Elon Musk on it. Conservatives obviously are putting forward an amendment to a bill to try and force a vote on whether there should be a full national statutory inquiry into the grooming scandal. If that vote goes ahead, how will you vote on it?
I won't vote for it because we've already had a national inquiry into child sexual exploitation and abuse. The Professor Alexis J inquiry conducted extensive investigation. Over 7,000 brave victims and survivors gave their testimony to that, and it is for them that we need to deliver justice, and we need to get on with the job of delivering for them, working at pace to deliver those recommendations that the previous government failed to do. That's what we deserve. We need action, less words.
And what if the families of the victims say that inquiry, for whatever reason, maybe because of its remit, maybe because of its results, left some stones unturned? Should those stones still be looked at more closely?
Well, as the Home Secretary said yesterday, we're implementing a new Victims' Voice panel, which will be integral to working through these recommendations with us as government, so that we have those victims and survivors at the heart of these recommendations. And if, once those recommendations have been implemented, then there's further work to do, then of course we will do that work.
It's interesting hearing the Home Secretary yesterday and you today, and listening to these pledges about all of the recommendations from the Alexis J report, as you said, 20 recommendations reported on in 2022, and the other details we heard from the Home Secretary as well. Is it fair to say that they're only being implemented with such speed and power behind them because Elon Musk shined a light on this over the last week or two?
No. We have been in government for 6 months now, and I can hand on heart say that I have attended many meetings looking specifically at these ICSA recommendations, cross-government meetings chaired by Jess Phillips, the Safeguarding Minister. I've been attending as Victims Minister, and many of us are cross-government ministers looking at our different portfolios, how best to implement these recommendations. They're not easy to implement. Some of them can be done quickly, as the Home Secretary said yesterday, and we will be bringing forward new offences in our crime and policing bill. But some of them are more complicated. They will take time, but we are working to do just that.
But again, just clear to get this very clearly on the record, all of what we've heard in the last, let's say, couple of days, we would have heard at this stage in the year regardless. None of this has been sped up, none of this has been implemented with more force or talked about with more force in the last couple of weeks because of Elon Musk and others shining a light on it.
This government was elected with a mandate to halve violence against women and girls over the course of a decade. We are getting on with delivering that plan. The ICSA recommendations, looking at them, working through them at pace, is exactly one part of that plan. The other part is what I'm here to talk about today, how we tackle the issue of intimate image abuse. All of this is being considered by this government, and all of this is being done. We are getting on with our plan for change, and we are acting as quick as possible.
And just finally, so it's very clear, no further inquiry of any sort is warranted in your view, personally?
What we need is to get on and implement the recommendations, and we're doing so at pace.
Let's move on and talk about the deepfakes, as you mentioned. You're making it illegal to create sexually explicit deepfakes. Just explain to us exactly what that means.
Yes, so this was a manifesto commitment for us. These very hyper-realistic deepfake technology, which is manipulated where someone can do it quite easily and change how you appear, what you're doing, how you look in an image. And when they are done for sexual gratification, then these deepfakes, then we are committed to making those illegal. But we are going one step further today as well. We are broadening that package of measures because we recognise that there are current gaps in the law, and we will be making it illegal to take these images without consent as well. We will be making it illegal to take these images without consent where there is sexual gratification there, but also when you're installing these covert cameras in a changing room, for example, or in a bathroom to capture these images, then we're also making that a criminal offence.
It's quite amazing, actually, when I was reading about this ahead of the interview. One can understand why perhaps deepfakes, where new technology makes them more possible, haven't been outlawed as yet. But it wasn't yet illegal to take a sexually explicit photograph of someone without their permission?
So it was very woolly. The legislation that existed did have gaps. For example, upskirting has been made illegal. This is where you take a photo underneath somebody's skirt. But if you take a photo down their blouse, of their breasts, for example, that currently isn't covered by existing criminal legislation. So what we're doing is we are clarifying the law, we're making it broader, we're making it more robust to protect women and girls, because 1 in 3 women in this country are victims of this intimate image abuse. It's sometimes referred to as revenge porn. It's awful, it's horrific. It really really, really makes women vulnerable, it intimidates them, and these perpetrators of these crimes deserve to feel the full force of the law.
We were just watching the VT as you were sitting down about Justin Trudeau. I mean, clearly the Canadian elections are not immediate, but the polling is suggesting, well, it's the reason why he's resigning, of course, that his party's prospects aren't that good. There's an election coming in Germany where something similar is happening. Keir Starmer's going to be quite on his own in terms of the sort of centre-left leaders among the G7.
I think the relationships that Keir Starmer has with our allies will continue regardless of who is in power. These relationships are enduring for many, many years, and there are things that are very important, like tackling the issue of intimate image abuse. You know, we can't legislate for the internet in a vacuum. We need our allies around the world to work with us on this, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Would it be easier, though, to be working with people like Trudeau as opposed to like Trump? They have different political views.
Yeah, there are different political views, but some issues, such as tackling violence against women and girls, do not cross political boundaries. These are things that are universal, that everyone needs to be tackling, whether that is misogyny and violence online or offline, and that is what this government are doing.
And just finally, the retail sales figures coming out just earlier today clearly show us a snapshot of a tepid economy, I think is a fair way to sum it up. How much of a priority is it to kickstart what has been a slow start economically for your premiership?
You know, this government has been making those difficult decisions in order to protect working people, to fix the foundations, getting on with our plan for change, in order to build that growth, that economic growth that we all need, whilst protecting working people. And it's, you know, the inheritance that we received from the previous government has not been over-exaggerated. We're taking those difficult decisions in order that people feel better off, they've got more money in their pocket, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Alex Davis-Jones, thanks so much for joining us. Very good to see you this morning. We're going to take a quick break here on Sky News Breakfast. When we come back, will gas prices be rising in the year ahead? Fears growth as Europe effectively rations its storage levels. Russia claims to have thwarted a surprise operation by Ukraine inside the Kursk region. We'll also talk about that. We'll be right back.
Mayhem in the Middle East, rippling in America's West.
Get back! Get back!
The resolve of these protesters is now being seriously tested. I saw police being forced or pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests.
None of this is a peaceful protest.
I'm Martha Kellner, and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. How are you feeling?
I am angry.
It is an anti-woman agenda.
Sky News, get the full story first. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support, but it's nasty out there.
Can you beat Donald Trump, Governor? President Biden, do you trust President Xi? President Biden says that this meeting went well. He said real progress was made on a whole host of issues. Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
There's no doubt that Kamala Harris and her team are harnessing the power of social media. Do you think Kamala is brat?
Kamala's brat.
Are you scared?
Yeah, we were scared. It was terrible. Strong wind, building tearing down.
As them say, our God works, so we can't do nothing.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. Free, wherever you get your news.
Excited.
I've had severe nightmares of these people coming in and just taking me in the middle of the night.
Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
I'm James Matthews, and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. Donald Trump, it would appear, is about to learn his fate. There's no doubting the strength of this hurricane as it roars through. Sky News, get the full story first. Do you fear a 4th indictment? Is it a drone?
He's from Sky News. He's from Sky News. He's entitled to ask me questions.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, To find out what's really going on, explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Sky News Breakfast. Well, coming up, we'll be looking at why gas prices could rise even higher this winter. But first, a reminder of all the day's top stories. Leah's got that for us.
Thank you, Wilfred. We're talking about the weather because nearly 200 flood warnings remain in place across England this morning. There are also yellow warnings for further snow and ice, which cover the north and west of the country. It's not looking great, is it? We'll have more on that later. Elsewhere, at least 53 people have died and dozens others have been injured after a strong earthquake in China. New figures have shown a dip in high street spending in the run-up to Christmas. The final quarter of 2024 saw a rise of just 0.4%, a real terms fall once inflation is taken into account. And the Prime Minister has accused people of spreading lies about grooming gangs and claims they aren't interested in the victims. This is after Elon Musk accused Sir Keir Starmer of being complicit in the scandal.
Yeah, thank you. Well, Europe is set for a colder than usual January, which means households across the continent could be forced to endure even higher gas prices. It's burning through its reserves faster than at any point in the last 7 years. And the closure of another pipeline from Russia means supplies are unlikely to be replenished anytime soon. Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, takes a look at the changing energy map in Europe.
Now, I realise gas prices, it's probably the last thing you want to talk about right now in the height of winter. But we do need to talk about what's going on in Russia, Ukraine with gas, because it's a big deal and it's going to affect us because we are all part of the same market. Even though we're not directly taking any Russian gas, what goes on here affects all of us. And if you just look at where gas typically comes from in Europe, some of it comes in on tankers, so LNG tankers, liquefied natural gas. Some of it's produced domestically, a lot of it in the North Sea, some of it in the UK. Some comes from Norway, so other pipelines, also from North Africa. But Russia, a lot of it historically has come from Russia. And if you just look at European gas, and this is a big deal because it goes into industry as well as going into our boilers, that red part there is Russian gas. And you're talking about 37% of European gas before the invasion of Ukraine. That's the rest of the stuff we're talking about, kind of domestic and Norwegian stuff. And if you look at the change, that's this year here. If you look at the change, that's down by 67%. So a massive fall, whereas the rest of the stuff has stayed more or less the same. But I want to show you this in particular, if we're going to zoom in on Russian pipeline gas, because that's also changing. It's changing. And when I talk about Russian pipeline, there's actually quite a few different pipelines that historically have been built coming into Europe. And it's worth just going through some of them because there's big stories and this is emerging as well. First of all, Yamal. This is a pipeline that goes through Belarus. That was sanctioned in 2022, so that's basically gone. We can kind of knock that off. Actually, flow stop in 2021. Nord Stream as well, as you probably saw, that was destroyed, or parts of it were destroyed in 2022, so that's gone as well. That was the biggest of all of the pipelines into Europe, which leaves the biggest remaining is the Ukraine pipelines. And that's where the news is. They have now stopped, OK? So this whole chunk here, it's actually already kind of lower than that. But historically, that's how big it was. That is also going to be gone. And that is going to be a concern for places like Slovakia, places like Austria as well, which are at the end of that pipeline. And we are now reliant, essentially, for pipeline gas from Russia just on this Turk stream, which is relatively small. And it means that Europe is going to have to dig further into its storage. Now, this is showing you the average amount of gas that we have on the continent stored. And let's compare it with where we are now. So this is 2024. And look, whereas we had quite a high level of gas, that you can see it always goes down in the winter, we build it back up over the summer, that is now falling very fast, so that we're starting this year with the lowest level of storage that we've had in quite some time. Put all of that together, so the storage situation, what's going on with pipeline gas from Russia, and that helps explain why wholesale prices, which feed into the prices we all pay, are now up to the highest level since April 2023. Those are wholesale prices in the Netherlands. But some context here. Zoom out, and you can see that even though they're high, we are still a long way away from where it was at the peak of the energy crisis.
Ed Conway there for us. Let's discuss this further. Angela Knight joins us now. She's the former Chief Executive of Energy UK. Angela, great to have you with us. I mean, I actually might start on a sort of positive note of all of this, and Ed's chart there zooming out a lot and showing how high prices got when the Russia-Ukraine war began, I think puts it all in perspective. That if you'd said then, or frankly at any point in the last decade, that we would lose 3 of 4 pipelines bringing Europe gas, you might have expected a much worse short-term reaction. I guess it shows some resilience, some effective adaptation of the European energy market in the last couple of years.
Yes, and it also shows the fact that Europe has got more used to importing LPG, LNG, you know, those liquefied natural gas tankers that ship around the world. In fact, one of the more extraordinary issues is that with Germany, they had no LNG importing ports when the Russia-Ukraine crisis hit. So at least something has been done. Ports have been built, facilities, terminals have been put in place. So Europe is able to import more of its gas other than by pipelines. But it's certainly also, I think, in the way that that report has been set out, shows that there has been a poor energy policy across Europe for some time, depending on major gas flows from what has always been a tricky country in Russia, and that they had not thought about the backup that was needed should something go awry. And here in this country, we have access directly to the North Sea, and so we've got more control over our own gas supplies, not necessarily the price, but certainly the supplies. But unfortunately, this government has decided that there should be no more licenses for drilling in the North Sea. I cannot see that that is a correct policy at all.
How much of a swing factor does the North Sea make to our supply? I know we get a lot, for example, from Norway, much more than from the North Sea. As we do see the gas reserves, the storage levels drop, is it something that the government should reconsider, or is it really a marginal factor compared to places like Norway?
No, it's not a marginal factor. Actually, at the height of the crisis, Russia-Ukraine and the gas crisis, we did manage to pump nearly 50% of the gas that we were consuming out of the North Sea. Now, what I think needs to happen is that there is and always going to be a gas dependency for both the medium and the short term. But what we have to do is build alternatives to gas. And those alternatives aren't renewables, however important renewables may be, because renewables are intermittent. We need to start building things like those small-scale nuclear power stations, and indeed that's a consideration that Europe needs to give as well. Because if you have that sort of power, that's there regardless, and it's more within your own control. Meanwhile, as well as thinking about the North Sea here in this country and what Europe is thinking, they need to look more broadly as well at their overall consumption. Can we do more about bringing down our consumption? I'm sure we can, as far as domestics are concerned, because domestically insulation does a very good job in that area. But for industry, and sometimes we forget the high dependency that industry has, both on use of gas itself, but also on power generated by gas turbines. And unless we're competitive in this country and competitive in Europe from an industrial perspective, then we will be on a decline as a region. So there's a lot in this energy policy, and there's a lot in the consideration that needs to be given. And I get very concerned that it tends to focus on how many wind farms one's got, which, yes, renewables, please use them. I'm not against that at all. But they're only part of what is a far more complicated story. And to a certain extent, energy policy, both in the UK and Europe, has picked about around the edges rather than got to the fundamental points of long-term continuous supply of power, electricity and gas to all our countries.
To clarify, Angela, when you say Ed, do you mean Ed Miliband or Ed Conway?
Oh, I do beg your pardon. Sorry. It was the Ed Conway report I meant. And it's the Ed Miliband who needs to think about getting his energy policy right. Well, too many Eds.
Just want to clarify, both experts in their field, of course. Wanted to touch on, you mentioned LNG, liquefied natural gas import terminals. that Germany's built some. We have a couple, of course. Is that something that really should be a greater focus of discussion, to import liquefied natural gas by boat from places like Qatar and especially the US in the years ahead? Or in fact, when we can get it from the North Sea or Norway, is it less of an issue for the UK, but should it be for continental Europe?
Well, the UK's got more LNG terminals, I think, than any other country in Europe. And a couple of years ago, LNG was being brought into this country. We were gasifying it, putting it down our pipelines and sending it in to help build up Europe's storage. So yes, Europe does need to build more terminals. The point, though, that you just made is a good one, that quite a lot of this LNG also comes from difficult parts of the world. A lot comes out of the Middle East, and the Middle East is, as we all know, a part of the world that's in significant turmoil. The US is an exporter. They've done a lot of fracking, and that's how they are able to now be a net exporter. So yes, when one's thinking about energy policy, you don't think, I must rely on this or rely on that. You need to look at, as a country, a whole range of areas from which you can get the necessary supply to power your country, both from an electricity perspective and from a gas perspective. And the UK has quite a high gas dependency because of our gas central heating. That's not going to go away overnight. It's not going to go away in the next 10, probably not 20, 25 years. So yes, LNG is important, and LNG is particularly important to some of those countries in Europe who historically have not turned to LNG for their gas, but now have to, and especially as you rightly pointed out, when the report rightly pointed out, Ukraine finally switching off the pipelines that cross that country from Russia has had a very significant effect on some of the Eastern European countries, which have been very much more highly dependent on that gas than Western countries have. And of course, don't necessarily have a coastline. Don't forget, not every country in Europe's got a coastline, so it can't get its LNG like that way.
Angela, just finally, I mean, obviously Ed's report broke down the prospect of prices ticking up a bit relative to the last year, but not anything like 2022. What's your outlook for the next year and maybe 3 years? Are we going to see it bump along where it is, or could we have another major shock like we did a few years ago?
Well, I think it's more likely to bump along where it is. I mean, we are expecting the price to go up for us in our houses in the next quarter. I can't remember the exact number, but in about the sort of £30. So there will be another increase. But I would expect it to more or less bump along under £2,000 for the average domestic household. So that is not anything like the peaks that we went to, but it's certainly significantly higher than it was before we had the crisis. But in saying that, that also means that I'm working on the assumption that essential backup to renewables is built, that we don't just rely on gas. We do something more substantive in all our countries to provide ourselves with a greater degree of control over our own power. I said nuclear power once, I'll say nuclear power again. And by saying it, I don't mean those huge stations which take 15 years and cost an absolute fortune to build. I mean these clever small-scale nuclear power stations, such as the one that Rolls-Royce is promoting, where you can build them in a couple of years and they don't take up a huge amount of space and they're safe. And that's the sort of thing that we need to be looking at seriously. We talk about it, but somehow it never gets over the line. And that is the case in many other European countries, with, of course, the obvious exception of France, which is heavily dependent on nuclear and has been for many years.
Angela Knight, great to talk as always. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Let's return now to the weather disruption that parts of the country are facing. Leicestershire and Lincolnshire both declared major incidents in response to the extreme weather hitting the UK and Ireland. Let's bring in now Sky's Rachel Venables, who's in Grantham in Lincolnshire for us this morning. Rachel, break it down. What have you experienced overnight there?
Well, there was clearly a huge amount of rain yesterday, and that led to a huge amount of flooding. The River Witham here in Grantham clearly bursting its black banks, and we're stood really in the aftermath. The ground muddy and silty. It almost looks like sand here. You can smell it as the river water obviously filled throughout this park and then managed to get into several homes. We know that around 20 properties were flooded just in the local lane here. We'll just pan and show you the river. You can see how high it is still, how fast moving it came up yesterday. And we can also get a glimpse, I think, of how high it came, because there's been a load of, you can see packing materials have obviously come in through the river. Obviously pollution part of a problem as well, and it's raised up to the tree line here. So this must have been where at its highest point we suspect the water got to yesterday. It's still flooded much of this park. As I mentioned already, you can see the branches and the silt and the detritus here. But people are able to walk through the park. We're able to access it here today. And obviously people in the local area will be counting the damage. Drone shots yesterday showed just how far the water got in the surrounding area. You could see dozens of homes where the water had completely filled the gardens. And as I mentioned already, we know that 20 homes on the western side of Belton Lane, which is just behind us here, that was actually flooded. And we know, of course, that Lincolnshire and Leicestershire, 2 counties which had to declare major incidents with a huge number of flood alerts and flood warnings still in place. And obviously today it's about counting the damage and it's also about the authorities keeping an eye out for any more rain. Thankfully now it is dry, but I'm sure there are many other places like this and people deeply concerned. One man I spoke to earlier who was just walking through the park said this was the worst, certainly in this part of Grantham, that he'd ever known it, and that his colleagues and friends who lived here as well had ever known it either.
Rachel, as always, thanks so much. Rachel Venables there. Still to come here on The Breakfast Show, Russia claims to have thwarted a surprise operation by Ukraine inside its Kursk region. We'll speak to a defence expert after the break.
Migrants risk their lives climbing aboard these trains in search of a dream, the United States.
It's really dangerous. They often get robbed on this train.
They suffer a lot by police, cartels.
What happens to them next, we just don't know. Do you miss your mum?
With Trump coming to the presidency, how much longer will people be accommodated?
The journey you've been through, it's been very difficult at times. Has it been worth it?
See. This is a journey which goes by one name, the Beast.
It's like a football final with only one team on the pitch. This isn't just a call to vote, but a call to remember. The freedom fought for by the African National Congress.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa.
A cyclone and 2 burst dams wiped out hundreds of generational homes.
This was the second dam that the floodwaters hit before it tore into Derna.
We are in the heart of Nairobi, and we're watching as protesters were heavily tear gassed.
The sheer fearlessness and persistence of these guys is astonishing.
We help you understand the world with us. I remember going into the iconic Durman market in the heart of Sudan's capital for the first time since the war started.
And this is what's left of it. Bullet holes through buildings, shelled balconies, bullet cases on the floor.
I witnessed the complete destruction of a place linked to my childhood memories and the lives of millions of people.
This is insane. This was a bustling residential area. So many friends who lived here.
My most memorable interview was with a 15-year-old boy who'd survived being stranded on a migrant boat on its way from Senegal to the Canary Islands.
After 13 days, our food, water and fuel supply ran out.
I felt awe when we saw the mountain gorillas in Rwanda.
We call him the king of the jungle. This is the alpha silverback.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky News.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Welcome back. The Kremlin says it's thwarted an attack by Ukraine inside its Kursk territory. It comes after reports of Ukrainian progress in the region, which some Russian commentators described as worrying. Well, joining us is the fellow at Yorktown Institute, Robert Clark. Robert, great to see you as always. Thanks so much for joining us. So what are Ukraine trying to do here, do you think?
Good morning, Will. Thanks for having me. Well, I mean, Ukraine have had a sizable force in the Russian Oblast of Kursk for around 5 months now, since late summer. And initially it was really used as a diversion tactic, a bit of deception on the battlefield, to basically split and fragment the Russian offensives, particularly across Kharkiv and Sumy regions. Now, 5 months later, and really we can see this as a political reaction, I think, almost to the incoming Trump administration and the high likelihood of some form of peace negotiation or post-conflict resolution. And Kyiv are really trying to now push as much as possible and take as much Russian territory as they can in a short amount of time as possible, mainly as a bargaining chip, I suppose, for some form of eventual negotiations later this year. But Ukraine are doing actually pretty well in Kursk, relatively speaking. They've committed enormous amounts of Russian troops to try and reinforce their positions. They've lost some 15,000 killed, the Russians, including apparently a battalion's worth of North Koreans in only the last 2 days. So the Ukrainian effort is actually going surprisingly well, and it's going to be interesting to see how much further they can push into Kursk.
Do you think it's the type of thing that Donald Trump would take note of, or maybe put a different way, do you think that's part of the calculation, or is it purely to be a bargaining chip with the Russians?
Yeah, I mean, far from me to speculate on President Trump's intentions, but I think, yeah, I mean, obviously he'll be aware of this. The American defense establishment will be likely providing some form of intelligence assessment for Ukraine during this offensive, as they have been doing for the last 2 or 3 years. But in terms of going forwards, it's going to make a huge deal more to President Putin than to President Trump. President Putin has committed his reputation with the Russian people quite recently over Christmas that he will return all of Russian Kursk to Russia. So the ability for Putin to really retain control of Kursk is going to be far more important to him and to Russia than it will be to President Trump going forwards.
So all of that makes it sound like Ukraine's doing not too badly at the moment. But on the flip side, Russia's been making advances in and around Kurakova.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this is a war that a lot of people forget. When we talk about the front, there's around 600, 700 miles, nearly 1,000 kilometers of various campaigns and tactical advances. And quite often when we talk about Russian or Ukrainian gains at the tactical level, we're literally talking about hedgerows and villages. This is an incredibly fluid and diverse sort of campaign on many fronts. So there are some Russian advances, there are many Ukrainian advances, but these are going incredibly slowly. What we have seen in Kursk in the last 48 hours, though, is a lot more progression on the Ukrainian side than we have done recently across many of the fronts, really.
And what are the sort of supplies, whether we're talking about cash or weapons, of the Ukrainians at the moment? I mean, how quickly could it run out once we do see a change of occupant of the White House, if further aid is diminished?
Yeah, I mean, it all comes down to American money, really. There seems to be enormous European, or a lack of European political ambition to scale up the resources that Ukraine will need should a Trump administration withhold some form of military aid and assistance. The goodwill of the European people is still there, but there's enormous divisions within both the European Union and at the state level, particularly in places like Germany, for politically sensitive reasons. And really, these countries need to step up. The UK has shown a lot of leadership over the last few years on this. And increasingly, we're looking now at states like Poland and the Baltic states, which obviously share a very similar threat to that of Ukraine. So I think the possibility is there. It just needs a little bit more easing in for some of these European countries to actually commit more fully.
As we assess things, how they stand now, are we realistically looking towards a negotiated settlement and perhaps even fairly soon, or what's your take?
It's incredibly hard to say. I've had some conversations with those in Washington who are more privy to this than I am. And the sense is, look, it's one of President Trump's most imminent sort of priorities is to try and get some form of resolution on the table, at least for Putin and Zelensky to, agree to potentially. This is going to be incredibly difficult for Ukraine. And I think people really have to respect the fact that this is Ukraine's decision ultimately. It's not America's, it's not ours. But I think really the American side are going to be looking at some kind of deal, certainly by Easter. And like I say, then it just comes down to how much President Putin is willing to sacrifice, particularly in areas like Kursk now. And also, unfortunately, how much President Zelensky is willing to sacrifice as well.
On that note, what's his political power domestically at the moment?
Who's that, sorry? President Zelensky?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been widely rumoured for the last couple of months that it's increasingly fragile, his situation in Kyiv. I mean, look, publicly, he still retains a lot of support amongst the Ukrainian population. But there are rumours, around, particularly in his government, there's a split, there's a rift. This war has been dragging on now for 3 years. 3 painful years for Ukraine, and we can see the toll that's taken on President Zelensky. Personally, I think he's done absolutely fantastically holding that together. He was never intended to be a serious politician, but he's really shown, serious political acumen and an appetite to serve the people of Ukraine. And I think the Ukrainians are still broadly quite aware of that. So, look, going into this year, I think he still retains an enormous amount of support from the Ukrainian people.
Robert Clark, as always, great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure, thank you.
Before we leave you this hour, let's have a look at the weather. And the weekend's disruptive rain and snow has gone, leaving us in a northerly flow, which will last for most of the week, bringing wintry showers and extensive frosts. Well, there's a frost for most, severe in the north, with wintry showers and icy stretches mainly in the north and west. The morning will bring good sunny spells, but wintry showers will develop more widely. Although many eastern parts will stay dry, snow looks largely confined to hills above 200 metres. It'll be cold and breezy with coastal gales in the northeast, but not as windy as yesterday. The afternoon will see the wind easing in the south and west, but expect little change otherwise. It'll be mostly dry and clear overnight, with a widespread sharp frost developing. That's your weather. We're going to take a quick break here on Sky News Breakfast, and when we come back, we'll have all of the day's top stories, including the latest reaction to the ongoing spat between all of the major parties and Elon Musk around grooming gangs. We'll be right back.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised.
If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Good morning. It's 8 o'clock. Coming up on today's show. Major incidents have been declared as severe flooding and further snow threatens to bring another day of chaos for people across the country.
And did you do less Christmas shopping than usual last year? We'll bring you the latest retail figures concerning the high street.
And a row is growing in the Commons after the Prime Minister accused people of spreading lies over grooming gangs.
It's Tuesday, the 7th of January. Your headlines. Nearly 200 flood warnings remain in place across England this morning.
A major incident's been declared in Lincolnshire. I'm here in Grantham, where a number of homes were flooded yesterday after this river burst its banks.
An earthquake in a mountainous region of western China kills at least 53 people. A crackdown on sexually explicit deepfakes could see predators face up to 2 years of jail. A polar vortex brings chaos to the US as 7 states declare emergencies in response to the winter storm. And France marks the 10th anniversary of the Charlie Hebdo attack with a series of memorials across Paris. A very good morning to you. Our top story, 187 flood warnings and almost 291 flood alerts remain in place across England this morning. A severe danger to life warning has also been issued for parts of northern Leicestershire as the UK continues to be battered by bad weather. All parts of the country have seen widespread travel chaos and power cuts, and in places some children have needed to be rescued after being stranded at school surrounded by flood water. Well, our Alice Porter is here with me to break down the severity of all of this, as she has been for the last couple of days. What's the latest?
Well, this is a very fast-moving situation, and every hour I speak to you, there seems to be a new development. The number of flood warnings has slightly gone down. We're now at 187. That's still more than we had yesterday. So some of those flood warnings from the Environment Agency, they have expired in the last hour, but we've still got, crucially, this severe flood warning in place, and that's in North Leicestershire, and that means that there is a threat to life in the area. And the Environment Agency say they have that in place because they have to do potentially a number of evacuations. We know yesterday 59 people were rescued by emergency services in the area. So this weather's really starting to impact people, community services. We've just had an update that flights have been suspended from Bristol Airport. We're waiting for further news on that. Liverpool Airport has been temporarily closed in order for them to clear snow. We're waiting for an update as to when flights will be resuming there. So it's really impacting some of our major airports in the UK. And we've also heard from East Midlands Ambulance Service that they have declared a critical incident for the first time ever. Now, that won't just be down to what we're seeing with the weather. Of course, there's winter pressures that the NHS has at this time of year, but to have the additional strain that you're going to be having on services because of ambulances not able to get to people in need, fallen trees, high flood water, it's a significant problem in the area.
And just quickly give us a snapshot of the different regional breakdowns. Where is it worst?
The situation in the southeast and the east of England, if we're looking at, say, Newcastle and Hull, it is fine. There's no warnings there in place, unlike yesterday, for example, where there was yellow weather warnings across the whole of the UK. So it's good news for some people in the UK today. It's not such good news for Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, the southwest. They've got those yellow weather warnings in place for snow. But this will develop, and by tomorrow we've got the only yellow weather warning in place for snow is along the south coast. So really everybody across the UK is really being impacted in different ways by this difficult weather.
Alice, great stuff. Thanks so much for that snapshot across the country. Let's dive into Lincolnshire now. Rachel's there for us, as you saw earlier, where, Rachel, there has been significant flooding already.
Yeah, there has, and there was a really serious scene here in Grantham yesterday. I'm stood at the River Witham. Obviously, as you can see now, I'm on the bridge. We're able to get across it, but you can see just how high the water came yesterday. This still fast-moving river, which burst its banks, completely flooding the park here, which surrounds it, and also flooding a number of homes as well. We know that around 20 homes were evacuated, but drone footage from yesterday showed just how far the brown water went, and you could see it flooding people's gardens and spreading out a huge way. If we just turn carefully here, you'll be able to see just how high the river is here. Again, really fast moving and down towards Belton Lane. And these are the houses that we understand were flooded yesterday. This is quite a large residential area. I'm just going to walk now as well so you can see some of the damage that we can pick up, of course, because as the sun comes up, we can really start to see how far the water got and the damage that it was done to this park. There's a children's playground over there, which we've seen and were told was completely submerged yesterday. And also you can see the silt underfoot. It sort of squelches, you can smell it as well. The muck and mud from the water that's been deposited here. It's quite slippy, have to be careful. You can also see piles of branches also that have been deposited here and just the damage. And we've seen a bit of the clean-up and some packing there as well. The polystyrene, which has obviously come in from the river, a bit of muck as well and pollution that's been left. But obviously, the crucial part is the homes. 20 homes evacuated here. We know more than 60 had to be evacuated with floodwaters getting into the properties around Lincolnshire. A major incident declared in this county and in Leicestershire as well. And of course now it's for people to try to work out what damage has been done as we fear for more flood warnings, of course, more flood alerts. As you can see now, of course, it is dry. It's a really crisp morning. It's very cold. And that was also the fear as well, that snow and ice would turn some of this flood water into ice and make it really quite dangerous. For now, this doesn't seem to be too bad, but of course the damage for those people whose homes were flooded, uncalculable at this point. But at the moment, as you can see, it's just about the damage and the water receding here at this particular part in Grantham.
Rachel, great stuff as always. Thanks so much. Now, the Prime Minister claims lies are being spread about grooming gangs by people who aren't interested in the welfare of the victims. This after Elon Musk accused Sir Keir Starmer of being complicit in the scandal. Serena's here to tell us more. And Serena, of course, this story does continue to grab all of the front pages.
Yes, exactly. It's on, as you say, most of the front pages. We spoke about it yesterday, and I think that's because the Prime Minister directly responded to the criticism yesterday and was quite robust in what he said. So he was talking about the poison of the far right. He said people are jumping on the bandwagon. This is quite impassioned speech that we haven't really seen from Keir Starmer that often. And you can tell that it's getting in the way. I mean, you were interviewing the Safeguarding Minister this morning, and these questions keep coming up, even though they want to talk about other things. So they wanted to talk about deep fakes and protection against violence against women and girls. But this is what she said on Elon Musk specifically.
We have been in government for 6 months now, and I can hand on heart say that I have attended many meetings looking specifically at these ICSA recommendations, cross-government meetings chaired by Jess Phillips, the Safeguarding Minister. I've been attending as Victims Minister, and many of us are cross-government ministers looking at our different portfolios, how best to implement these recommendations. They're not easy to implement. Some of them can be done quickly, as the Home Secretary said yesterday, and we will be bringing forward new offences in our crime and policing bill. But some of them are more complicated. They will take time, but we are working to do just that.
So there you were rightly asking her whether Elon Musk had thrown this to the top of the agenda, and she was saying, no, I was in meetings, we were talking about this as a government, we're already working on this. But Alexis Jay, who has done the national inquiry, has been speaking this morning, and she says it is an uncomfortable situation that this has accelerated it up the agenda. And whilst the government were working on these things, it's happened much more quickly than she would have thought. So you've got the Home Secretary yesterday implementing one of the recommendations, which is mandatory reporting. That's if child sexual abuse allegation is made, they will have to report it, or there will be strict punishments if they don't do that. So things are happening, but I think that's the awkward tension that this US billionaire is now in getting involved in domestic issues, and there are ramifications from that. I would also say that Elon Musk has been tweeting overnight as well, so he's not backing down. This will continue to rumble on.
And including with the Conservatives formalising their call for a statutory inquiry.
Yes, exactly. They say there could be up to 50 towns that still haven't been investigated. They want a national inquiry, another national inquiry, and I think you're speaking to the Minister, Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Minister, sorry, yep. Robert Jenrick today, so he
Next hour at 9:15. Serena, great stuff for now. Thanks so much. Now, Christmas, one of the busiest times of the year for shopping, but purses appear to have tightened due to the cost of living crisis. Spending wasn't as high as retailers would have hoped. Let's get more now with our business correspondent, Paul Kelso. Paul, break down the numbers for us.
Yeah, so we've got some numbers from the British Retail Consortium, which represents retailers, as the name suggests, giving their impressions of the Christmas trading and the final month of the year, December. That gives us a quarterly number as well. And while across the last 3 months of 2024, retail sales rose 0.4% year on year, that was much less than retailers hoped, not the Christmas bump that they might have wanted, and also a sharp division between what people were spending on food and non-food. So the difference broadly between what we were eating and drinking and what we were giving at Christmas. Actually, non-food sales down 1.5%, so a fall in gifts, which the BRC, the Retail Consortium, says they believe is a consequence of people managing household budgets more carefully than they might otherwise have been. So that feeds into the gloomy picture we've had in most of the economic data and forecasting from business groups in this year, which is already young, but the message is getting familiar, that people haven't been spending as much in the build-up to Christmas, and the new year is going to bring a tougher time for retailers, with largely as a consequence of the budget, with the increase in national insurance contributions, increase in the minimum wage, which many people in retail are paid, increasing the burden on businesses, and that is likely to lead to an increase in prices. It's a message that's echoed actually by perhaps the most notably successful retailer, Next, which has announced its figures for Christmas. It's shown an increase in sales, it's increased its full-year profit forecast, but it says that it believes that it will have to increase prices by 1% as a consequence of those increased costs of trading, and they don't believe there's any way of offsetting those other than asking us to pay more. I should say the contrast between non-food sales and food sales is further emphasised with some numbers we've just got from Kantar, who monitor sales across the board. Supermarket sales, particularly vigorous in the build-up to Christmas. What money we were spending, it seems we were spending on food. The average spend on the Christmas shop was £460. That is a record figure, up more than 2%, according to Kantar's numbers. And here's one. Well, if you thought you were busy in those few days before Christmas, the average family made 17 shopping trips in the build-up to Christmas. So if you thought you were in and out of the shop a lot, you were.
Well, I mean, I wasn't. 17 trips I mean, that's nuts. Do they not know about Amazon and the ability to get some of the shopping done online?
I don't believe that even you never run out of milk, Wilf. I don't believe it.
Yeah, but I don't need 17 separate pints of it. But anyway, there we go.
Perhaps not. Well, the supermarkets are glad not everyone's as organised as you.
Yeah, well, I believe your statistics. I just think people could probably be a bit more, a tad more organised. So, Paul, great stuff, as always. Thanks so much. Paul Kelso there for us. Now, switching tone, at least 95 people have now died after a strong earthquake that we told you about earlier hit Tibet in western China, near to Nepal. Let's get more from our Asia correspondent. Nicole Johnson's been covering it for us. Nicole, sadly, the death toll clearly rising.
That's right, Wilf. State media is saying 95 people killed, 130 injured, and that had been the fear over the last few hours, that as the rescue crews were able to get in there and start sort of digging through the rubble and the remains, that the death toll would go up. Around an hour ago, it was 53, now 95. And of course, the great concern is that it will go up even further. There are 27 villages in the county of Tingri. Now, that is the epicentre of this earthquake. It struck in the autonomous area of Tibet, near one of the region's holiest cities. Now, Chinese officials are saying that the magnitude was 6.8. The US is putting it at 7.1. Regardless, though, it is very serious. The Chinese rescue teams, around 1,500 of them, are in the region now. And the tremors and aftermath of this is being felt outside of China as well, in Bhutan, in India, and even in the Nepalese capital of Kathmandu. But of course, the other great concern any time that there's an earthquake in this region is that the death toll will keep increasing. Now, you might remember back a decade ago, that massive earthquake in Nepal ended up with a death toll of around 9,000 people. It doesn't appear that this one is as serious as that at this stage, but, you know, there's a big effort underway to try and get to people as quickly as possible. And it is a remote area, it's mountainous, it isn't easy to get to, but teams are in there trying to do it as we speak.
Nicole Johnson, as always, thanks so much for that. Well, time for all of the day's other top stories now. Leah's got those for us.
Thank you, Wilfred. Talking about the weather here in the UK, but in the United States, problems there too. At least 7 states have declared an emergency as a winter storm causes widespread chaos. Storm Blair has swept eastwards across the country, leaving what the National Weather Service have called the heaviest snowfall in at least a decade. And extreme weather is forecast for the next couple of days too. Sky's David Blevins has this report.
It's the worst winter storm to hit the United States in a decade, the Midwest bearing the brunt of the blizzard. The snow reached Washington, blanketing a region 30 states wide. That placed 60 million Americans under a weather alert, 7 states forced to declare an emergency. Hundreds of flights were either cancelled or delayed, and with train services disrupted too, the National Weather Service advised people to avoid all but essential travel. They're used to snow here in the capital, but not this amount of it. In most parts of the district, it's 6 inches deep. And some isolated areas are recording 12 inches. That's a foot of snow they're commuting through. That requires ingenuity. Some found a way to reach their destination, while others had their hands full making the most of the winter wonderland. There's a winter weather alert across 30 states, and here you are building a snowman. What inspired you to do that today?
Well, when snowing in DC, right?
We're both from Florida, and so this is like our first snow ever, and so we just needed to really take advantage of it.
I'm from California. We very rarely get snow, and so when I get snow, not by choice, I decide to have fun with it.
Honestly, it's been very nice, very peaceful. I don't mind it.
Get ready! Charge!
With federal government and schools shut, dozens faced off in what's become an annual tradition, countering the chill with a great snowball battle on Meridian Hill. David Blevins, Sky News in Washington.
UK ambulance services are on course to report the highest ever rate of violent and abusive incidents against their staff. The Association of Ambulance Chief Executives says at least 55 paramedics are abused or attacked every day, with incidents including physical and verbal abuse, sexual assaults and serious attacks involving weapons. People who create sexually explicit deep fakes could face up to 2 years behind bars under new laws designed to protect victims, who are usually women or girls. It also will be an offence to take intimate images of a person without consent. And events marking the 10-year anniversary of the attack on the French satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo will be held in Paris today. You'll remember 12 people died in a newsroom massacre. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron will be among those paying tribute to victims, while a special edition of Charlie Hebdo has been released. Donald Trump has lost his bid to postpone sentencing for his hush money conviction. The US president-elect's lawyers argue that his election victory could conclude the case, but a New York judge confirmed his sentencing will go ahead on Friday as scheduled. Steel giants Tata and British will join a new government council aimed at rebuilding the industry. It follows recent job losses and predictions of more as companies switch to greener furnaces. The council will also consult on how to spend over £2 billion of new investment.
Yeah, great stuff. Thank you. Now, Christmas shopping didn't bring the cheer to retailers that they were hoping for. Total sales increased by only 0.7% from 2023. Retailers have warned if the trend continues, prices could increase or jobs could be cut. Senior consultant at Retail Economics, Nicholas Found, joins us now with a bit more on these details. Very good morning to you, Nicholas.
Morning.
So just break down the figures for us, because we did see sales increase, but when you kind of give it more context, it's perhaps a little bit more disappointing than we expected.
That's right. I think we need to take a holistic view of what's going on in the market ultimately and look at the wider trend over the past 3 months.
And when you do that, you actually see the sales, the figures released today have been very disappointing over Christmas. It's arguably aligned with our expectations in a challenging market. So what we've seen over the past couple of years is that people have gone through a cost of living crisis. It eroded spending power by about £50 billion over 18 months. That's translated to fragile confidence and ultimately led to more selective spending. And we're still seeing that play out over Christmas and in the year ahead.
What are the biggest factors for shoppers in terms of seeing that bounce back or worsen? Is inflation the key factor?
Indeed. I mean, the positive story now is that inflation is subsiding. It is generally. Earnings growth is outpacing inflation, which is great. And it means that disposable incomes are gradually recovering, but there's ultimately a path to recovery. Discretionary spending has decreased over the past couple of years, and it's going to take time for that to recover, ultimately over the next couple of years. It is recovering at different rates, depending on what households we're talking about. So more affluent households have generally seen their spending recover faster than the least affluent. But there's ultimately a journey to that path.
And what about interest rates, which obviously different forecasts for the year ahead of how many cuts we might get. Sure. But is that a positive kicker for retailers in the year ahead if we get interest rate cuts?
Definitely. We expect interest rates to come down gradually over the year ahead. Ultimately, though, they are elevated compared to the ultra-low rates previously over the past decade. And that has squeezed middle-income consumers. And they're a really important cohort for consumer spending because they want to go out and spend, but ultimately they are being constrained by higher mortgage rates. They're seeing rents go up as well as landlords pass on higher housing costs as well. So that core market is really being squeezed at the moment.
And obviously we're talking here about the fourth quarter last year and the Christmas period in particular. To what extent are people's habits changing in terms of when they spend in the build-up to Christmas, in the aftermath, when the sales hit? Is it sort of a wrong period? We put a lot of focus on it. Is it too much focus now because people spread their spending out all through the year?
People definitely spread their spending out more over the Christmas period. So we tend to see like two peaks over Christmas now. Around Black Friday, which is in late November, and also in the lead up to Christmas, which is far more traditional. But ultimately, people are being a lot more selective when they spend. They are waiting for promotions. They are looking to bargain hunt. And that's a result of squeezed incomes over the past couple of years.
And what about the shift from fixed spending to online spending?
That's still playing out. What's been really interesting is that during the pandemic, people had to shift their spending online. That exposed people to these new digital journeys. People were spending on their mobiles, desktops, etc. But during the cost of living crisis, we saw some of that retrenchment back to stores because people were looking to save on delivery fees, return costs, just to reduce their spending as much as possible. But now we're actually seeing some of that online sales come back. And we actually saw that in Next results this morning. Online sales were actually outpacing their store sales.
Very interesting. And then just finally, in terms of the sort of economy as a whole, is that the key factor as well? Is there a very strong correlation between retail spending and GDP figures overall? And what's the forecast there for the year ahead?
Certainly. GDP is ultimately going to be driven by government spending over the next year. That's going to be a big factor helping GDP. Consumer spending we expect to still remain constrained ultimately. But it is all linked around confidence. So if people don't feel confident, then they're not going to go out and spend.
Nicholas, great to see you this morning. Thanks so much for joining
Pleasure.
us. Nicholas Found from Retail Economics. Now, Europe is set for a colder than usual January, which means households across the continent could be forced to endure even higher gas prices. It's burning through its reserves faster than at any point in the last 7 years. And the closure of another pipeline from Russia means supplies are unlikely to be replenished anytime soon. Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, takes a look at the changing energy map.
Now, I realise gas prices, it's probably the last thing you want to talk about right now in the height of winter. But we do need to talk about what's going on in Russia, Ukraine with gas, because it's a big deal and it's going to affect us because we are all part of the same market. Even though we're not directly taking any Russian gas, what goes on here affects all of us. And if you just look at where gas typically comes from in Europe, some of it comes in on tankers, so LNG tankers, liquefied natural gas. Some of it's produced domestically, a lot of it in the North Sea, some of it in the UK. Some comes from Norway, so other pipelines, also from North Africa. But Russia, a lot of it historically has come from Russia. And if you just look at European gas, and this is a big deal because it goes into industry as well as going into our boilers, that red part there is Russian gas. And you're talking about 37% of European gas before the invasion of Ukraine. That's the rest of the stuff we're talking about, kind of domestic and Norwegian stuff. And if you look at the change, that's this year here. If you look at the change, that's down by 67%. So a massive fall, whereas the rest of the stuff has stayed more or less the same. But I want to show you this in particular, if we're going to zoom in on Russian pipeline gas, because that's also changing. It's changing. And when I talk about Russian pipeline, there's actually quite a few different pipelines that historically have been built coming into Europe. And it's worth just going through some of them, because there's big stories and this is emerging as well. First of all, Yamal. This is a pipeline that goes through Belarus. That was sanctioned in 2022, so that's basically gone. We can kind of knock that off. Actually, flows stop in 2021. Nord Stream as well, as you probably saw, that was destroyed, or parts of it were destroyed in 2022, so that's gone as well. That was the biggest of all of the pipelines into Europe, which leaves the biggest remaining is the Ukraine pipelines. And that's where the news is. They have now stopped, OK? So this whole chunk here, it's actually already kind of lower than that. But historically, that's how big it was. That is also going to be gone. And that is going to be a concern for places like Slovakia, places like Austria as well, which are at the end of that pipeline. And we are now reliant, essentially, for pipeline gas from Russia just on this Turk stream, which is relatively small. And it means that Europe is going to have to dig further into its storage. Now, this is showing you the average amount of gas that we have on the continent stored. And let's compare it with where we are now. So this is 2024. And look, whereas we had quite a high level of gas, that you can see it always goes down in the winter, we build it back up over the summer, that is now falling very fast, so that we're starting this year with the lowest level of storage that we've had in quite some time. Put all of that together, so the storage situation, what's going on with pipeline gas from Russia, and that helps explain why wholesale prices, which feed into the prices we all pay, are now up to the highest level since April 2023. Those are wholesale prices in the Netherlands. But some context here. Zoom out, and you can see that even though they're high, we are still a long way away from where it was at the peak of the energy crisis.
Ed Conway there for us. Well worth checking out his full write-up online on the Sky News app. Well, still coming on the breakfast show, Sir Keir Starmer is accused of being out of touch as the row over grooming gangs escalates. We'll have more on what the PM's had to say. Plus, we'll take a look at what's next for Canada after Justin Trudeau's resignation as Prime Minister. And we'll be live in Paris on what's now the 10th anniversary of the Charlie Hebdo attack.
Mayhem in the Middle East, rippling in America's West.
Get back! Get back!
The resolve of these protesters is now being seriously tested. I saw police being forced or pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests.
None of this is a peaceful protest.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. How are you feeling?
I am angry. It is an anti-woman agenda.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support, but it's nasty out there.
Can you beat Donald Trump, Governor? President Biden, do you trust President Xi? President Biden says that this meeting went well. He said real progress was made on a whole host of issues. Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
There's no doubt that Kamala Harris and her team are harnessing the power of social media. Do you think Kamala is brat?
Kamala's brat.
Are you scared?
Yeah, we were scared. It was terrible. Strong wind, building tearing down.
As them say, our God works, so we can't do nothing.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. Free, wherever you get your news.
Excited.
I've had severe nightmares of these people coming in and just taking me in the middle of the night.
Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
I'm James Matthews and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. Donald Trump, it would appear, is about to learn his fate. There's no doubting the strength of this hurricane as it roars through. Sky News, get the full story first. Do you fear a fourth indictment? Is it a draw?
He's from Sky News. He's from Sky News. He's entitled to ask me questions.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Well, welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Well, in just a moment, our big political debate of the morning. How should British politics handle interventions from Elon Musk? Katie Balls and Benjamin Butterworth are both here to discuss that. But first, a reminder of all of the day's top stories. Leah's got those first.
Thank you, Wilfred. Well, nearly 200 flood warnings remain in place. Across England this morning, there are also yellow warnings for further snow and ice, which will cover the north and west of the UK. Elsewhere, at least 95 people have died and dozens others have been injured after a strong earthquake in Tibet in western China. And new figures have shown a dip in high street spending in the run-up to Christmas. The final quarter of 2024 saw a rise of just 0.4%, a real terms fall once inflation is taken into account. And the Prime Minister has accused people of spreading lies about grooming gangs and claims they aren't interested in the victims after Elon Musk accused Sir Keir Starmer of being complicit in the scandal.
Yeah, great stuff. Thanks so much for that. Time now for our political debate in the morning, and we're talking about, amongst other things, the increasing row between the Prime Minister and Elon Musk. As I said, Katie Balls, the political editor of The Spectator, and Benjamin Butterworth, a journalist at our iPaper, are both with me. Good morning to you both. I guess it was meant to be a restful holiday period for all politicians, not that restful for Starmer or Badenoch. Who is it most restless for between the two, Katie?
Well, I think that Kemi Badenoch found herself dragged into various fights, including on the Reform membership. But it's Keir Starmer who has the most pressure on him because he leads the government. And there, he hasn't had much respite. And you can see from the fact that they've tried to not have a reset, but continue this idea of focusing on what voters want, trying to correct some of the first 6 months. And yet this Elon Musk row has just dragged it to an area that Keir Starmer doesn't want to be in. And I think it just does show you how tricky the next few months, particularly with the inauguration of Donald Trump, are going to be for Keir Starmer.
Benjamin, tricky perhaps, but have we seen a slightly different sort of dynamism in terms of response from the government, whether it was the press conference yesterday or seeing Yvette Cooper and members of the Justice Department this morning talk about implementing more quickly the previous recommendations of the review from 2022?
Well, I mean, they've certainly had a problem that when these stories take them by surprise, they haven't been very good at shutting them down. I know that I spoke to people in Downing Street last week, and their view was, why is anyone taking Elon Musk seriously? He doesn't understand British politics. He hasn't done the hard yards of understanding what he's talking about. And yet here we are a few days later, the Prime Minister had to come out and say something. You know, there is a suggestion this morning, I know that Alexis Jay, who did that big report, has said that they're not asking for a new inquiry. The victims group didn't ask for a new inquiry. And so I think it's a difficult position for the government to be in, because you've got this scenario where a lot of people online, a lot of the newspaper front pages are criticising them, but also there's already been an inquiry, and are they better to implement the results of that?
Katie, in terms of this debate about Elon Musk and how well he does or doesn't understand British politics, I guess on one point it doesn't really matter because he's getting the attention and he is changing the nature of debate. I thought it was fascinating when he said the particular comment about Nigel Farage isn't the right leader for reform. That, in a snapshot, does suggest he doesn't really grasp British politics because Farage is reform.
He is, and also the very set-up of reform is not like your usual political party, means he's, near impossible to remove. But I think as soon as that tweet was sent on Sunday by Elon Musk, you could almost hear the laughter coming from both Tories and Labour, and a little bit of relief that this axis of Elon Musk and Nigel Farage and potentially this £100 million donation wasn't quite a sure thing as it has seemed to be when you're looking ahead to the year. That said, Elon Musk is now retweeting Nigel Farage again. So I think in the new world we live in, where we judge those quote tweets, I think all is not lost between them. But I think it does just show how unpredictable an ally Elon Musk is. And I think any political leader in the UK who courts his patronage too hard needs to be pretty careful. They can't rely on him in tough weather, particularly.
I mean, it's going to be interesting on the flip side in the US how long his partnership with Elon Musk, with Donald Trump lasts and whether that faces a strain at some point. On that topic, Benjamin, will actually dealing with Donald Trump seem a little bit easier in comparison, or is that still the big tough task for the Prime Minister in the next month or so once the inauguration's passed?
Well, if only I knew the answer, and I think that's what they must be thinking. It is so unpredictable. Donald Trump is unpredictable by nature, but you've kind of got a sense of what he might do because we've had 4 years of it before. And now you've got this situation where, you're having diplomatic relations by Twitter, and you've got Nigel Farage in the middle of it, who it looked like a very unhelpful point because he's stirring the pot and maybe trying to do difficulties for the government. But then if the two parties fall out, who knows if that will maintain? And I think that, the government is going to be alarmed. There was talk yesterday that they might harm our security relationship. We share hugely with the US in our security and intelligence, and whether this kind of unpredictability means that we can't share the same levels of information.
Just bringing back, Katie, to Kemi Badenoch and the Conservative leader, how has she been doing? I mean, we've sort of talked about this in the past, the back end of the year in her first month or two in post. To start the year, she started it well, or is it still I mean, I'm really fascinated that today she could grab the agenda and they're putting Robert Jenrick out, who joins us next hour, not the leader, Kemi Badenoch.
Yes, and of course, Robert Jenrick was, and perhaps still is, Kemi Badenoch's main leadership rival. So that's an interesting one. But for now, they seem to be united. I think that the jury is out on Kemi Badenoch's leadership. I think things like the row with Farage about membership numbers made some Tories a little bit nervous. I think, though, this plan to add an amendment to a bill this week to try and force a public inquiry, that's seen as a smart move from opposition. And I think she really has until May to establish herself, and then her critics are going to decide what they think of her based on the results of those local elections and how Nigel Farage does in comparison to her.
Switching the focus a little bit, Benjamin, we talked a little bit about international relations, and obviously President Trump most in like Trudeau's decision to stand down yesterday reminds us of elections to come in Canada, in Germany, and it doesn't look particularly likely that the incumbents who are fellow centre-left governments to Keir Starmer will hold power. Is that going to make it very isolating and tricky for Keir Starmer, or really is it just a question of the UK-US relationship that matters?
I mean, it's not going to be helpful, is it, that your natural allies have very different governments? But if you look at the way he's dealt with Meloni in Italy, they have had a surprisingly decent relationship. They've been exchanging information. They've been trying to copy some of what Italy is doing on its borders and dealing with boats that go over there. And so, there's some evidence that maybe you can manage it. I think maybe one of the questions about Trudeau is that he was being very anti-Trump, and so I don't think it was that much of a surprise that he went. He had domestic problems with getting anything passed in the Canadian Parliament, but the fact that he kept attacking the guy that's about to be his neighbour and the most powerful man in the world, it suggests that following the Trudeau route would not be a good idea for Keir Starmer.
In terms of the agenda items, Katie, for the government domestically in the year ahead, I guess at the back end of the year we were talking all about, obviously, the economy and also immigration numbers. The NHS has been added, if it wasn't already, to the top of that list of numbers. We have clear metrics that we can measure the government on all three. Is this an opportunity for them, or is this a risk? And particularly the NHS targets of 500,000 extra appointments by the end of the year, 2 million per year by the end of the Parliament. That's a big target.
Yeah, they are tangible, and I think that they were saying they're ambitious but achievable. But it does all feel a little bit Rishi Sunak 5 priorities, and you look at that, and they really became almost an albatross around his neck. They thought it was a clever guise, and it was really hard to meet them. The only big difference is Labour have not put a target on, small boat crossings, for example. I think probably because it became such a headache for Rishi Sunak.
And Katie, obviously, Starmer's in a very, very strong position, regardless of what people on social media might try and say. That said, what about across his cabinet? Will there be a reshuffle of sorts? How soon in the year might it come? Is it people in the top 3 or 4 positions at risk, or not really?
Well, those around Keir Starmer always say that we, the journalists, love saying there's about to be a reshuffle, and he believes in long-term decisions. But there's certainly talk about, potentially Wes Streeting one day moving to the Home Office. However, that big NHS brief means that you wouldn't expect it to happen particularly soon. I think there could be some movement. And then, of course, there's the economy and what happens there. I think Rachel Reeves is very safe, very important. But if things keep going in the wrong direction, Number 10 will feel like they have to do something almost to signal that they are getting a grip of things, and that's why we get back to Trump and tariffs.
And Ben, the focus on the autumn statement, I think end of March is the date that's been set for that, is much greater than Rachel Reeves would have thought or expected after the big budget that she did, of course, in October. We're just looking, by the way, as you answer that question, live pictures of Downing Street because the first cabinet meeting of the day is due to start shortly.
Yeah, I mean, the budget was not a roaring success. I think they expected that it was going to be very controversial with the £40 billion in tax rises. I don't think, as Katie said and as you referred, that it's really put much pressure close to home on Rachel Reeves or the Prime Minister. Their whole idea is that they're going to have to put the pain now and plan it out. So if they were to start rejigging the top posts, I think it would undermine the whole strategy that they're facing. And if you look at the way Keir Starmer behaved in opposition, well, people stayed in post for years at a time, which is particularly unusual in opposition. So I wouldn't expect there to be a big change. But, it's going to be very difficult for them because Donald Trump comes in. Is he going to have these tariffs on imports? One of the big jobs Lord Mandelson has is to try and deal with that problem. That could completely change the figures and really strangle our economy. And then you have serious questions about the Chancellor and her plans because everything is rewritten.
So before we wrap this conversation up, both of you, Katie first, take us inside the room of the Cabinet meeting today and the mood from Cabinet members. Are they a bit peeved with Keir Starmer? Are they excited about the year ahead?
Well, I think everyone ended the year pretty drained, and I think there was some annoyance around the Cabinet table about what they think were avoidable errors. So the winter fuel payment regularly comes up. One of the first things Rachel Reeves did was to take it away, and I think they think it's landed so badly politically that it wasn't worth the comparatively small amount of money they think it is now going to bring in. But I think there is optimism, and let's try and find out that they do have time on their side and they have a big majority. But I wouldn't say it's an ecstatic mood around the Cabinet at the moment. I more hope things will get better.
Are you hearing something similar, Benjamin?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the idea, you had today they will hear the question on whether there should be a general election from that petition that got 3 million signatures. Now, Labour MPs were not bothered about that, right? It was a storm in a teacup. But I do think they know that there's a sense that, governments, like with Boris Johnson's Partygate, these things can sometimes take hold. And when you have a series of them, when you've had things like this grooming scandal question that's going on at the moment, they have to have some positive news at some point. And I'm not sure where that's coming from.
Benjamin, Katie, as ever, a pleasure to have you both with us. Thank you very much. And we will, of course, keep an eye on those arrivals in Downing Street for that first Cabinet meeting of the year. Meanwhile, another story which we just mentioned in part, the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, has announced his resignation amid growing turmoil in his party. The 53-year-old has led the ruling Liberal Party since 2013 and the country since 2015. But has faced increasing calls to step down amid poor opinion polls and high-profile resignations. Here's our international correspondent, Diana Magnay.
And so, after 9 years as Prime Minister, a momentous announcement from Canada's Justin Trudeau.
Canadians deserve a real choice in the next election, and it has become obvious to me with the internal battles that I cannot be the one to carry the Liberal standard into the next election.
A familiar face on the international circuit, the longest standing of the current G7 crew. Justin Trudeau championed Ukraine, the climate and liberal values, which saw him come in with a strong mandate in 2015, but is not what voters want now.
Prime Minister, was it a productive meeting with President-elect?
It was an excellent conversation.
Especially not with Donald Trump threatening a 25% tariff on all Canadian goods and trolling the Canadian leader as just another governor of a US state. Trump tweeting on Truth Social after their meeting last month, "It was a pleasure to have dinner the other night with Governor Justin Trudeau of the great state of Canada. I look forward to seeing the governor again soon so that we may continue our in-depth talks on tariffs and trade." He grew up as Canadian political royalty, son of a revered Prime Minister, meeting the Queen first as a 5-year-old.
Rather different sentences.
Yes.
Now, isn't it?
I will say you were much taller than me the last time we met.
But his political star could not outshine the economic crunch from COVID. And in December last year, the sudden resignation of his finance minister dealt a final blow. Chrystia Freeland charging the government in the face of Trump's trade threats with costly political gimmicks, which make Canadians doubt that we recognise the gravity of the moment. The opposition Conservatives now hold a huge lead in the polls. Justin Trudeau left with these words for his rivals.
Stopping the fight against climate change doesn't make sense. Backing off on the values and strength in diversity that Canada has always worked to pull itself together on is not the right path for the country.
But with his popularity in shreds, he has concluded that the political path forward is not for him to tread.
Do you think it's irresponsible to resign? Why not earlier?
Diana Magnay, Sky News.
Lots more still to come on The Breakfast Show. Up next, we'll cross to Paris, where events will be held today, marking 10 years since the deadly attack on the Charlie Hebdo magazine.
Migrants risk their lives climbing aboard these trains in search of a dream, the United States.
It's really dangerous. They often get robbed on this train.
They suffer a lot by police, cartels.
What happens to them next, we just don't know. Do you miss your mum?
Yeah.
With Trump coming to the presidency, how much longer will people be accommodated?
The journey you've been through, it's been very difficult at times. Has it been worth it?
See. This is a journey which goes by one name, the Beast.
It's like a football final with only one team on the pitch. This isn't just a call to vote, but a call to remember. The freedom fought for by the African National Congress.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa.
A cyclone and 2 burst dams wiped out hundreds of generational homes.
This was the second dam that the floodwaters hit before it tore into Derna.
We are in the heart of Nairobi, and we're watching as protesters were heavily tear gassed.
The sheer fearlessness and persistence of these guys is astonishing.
We help you understand the world with us. I remember going into the iconic Durman market in the heart of Sudan's capital for the first time since the war started. And this is what's left of it. Bullet holes through buildings, shelled balconies, bullet cases on the floor. I witnessed the complete destruction of a place linked to my childhood memories and the lives of millions of people. This is insane. This was a bustling residential area. So many friends who lived here. My most memorable interview was with a 15-year-old boy who'd survived being stranded on a migrant boat on its way from Senegal to the Canary Islands.
After 13 days, our food, water and fuel supply ran out.
I felt awe when we saw the mountain gorillas in Rwanda.
We call him the king of the jungle. This is the alpha silverback.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky News.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Welcome back to Breakfast. Bit of a role reversal going on today. Sky News today at 10 a.m. We'll be with Gareth Barlow. Welcome back, Gareth. Happy New Year. What are you doing to hold down the fort at the all-important 10 a.m. hour?
The most important 10 a.m. that's ever existed. Is that not the case? Well, also, I'm so jet-lagged, I could have been up to have done breakfast as well. I didn't really need to have done the mid-mornings. But anyway, we're going to be carrying on talking about the weather. I've just dash between offices here in the Sky News campus. It's been wet snow here, but elsewhere, Leicestershire, Lincolnshire, key areas of emergency there. We've got our reporters on the ground bringing you the latest on those weather warnings too. They're going to continue for the next few days. This is the situation here in central London near the Sky HQ centre. It's a nice start to the day, a little bit of a wintry shower, but elsewhere across the United Kingdom, a very different picture. So we're going to bring all of the latest events and developments and forecast here on Sky News. Obviously, the sad news yesterday, the police say they found the body of a gentleman aged somewhere between his 50s and 60s. Any more details on that, we'll, of course, bring that to viewers too. Also, we're sticking with the natural world, turning our attention to Tibet, the earthquake there, 7.1 magnitude quake. At least 90 people there now known to have died. An area around 4,000 kilometres from Beijing in China. Very difficult to get to with regards to not only just news gathering, but also rescuers and responders. We'll bring you all the details on that. And as I know, you're talking about 10 years since that Charlie Hebdo attack in Paris.
Indeed, we're going to talk about that next, Gareth. We look forward to your coverage at 10 a.m. Sky News today. Make sure to stay tuned for that. As Gareth said, we're going to talk now about the Charlie Hebdo 10-year anniversary and go to Paris to bring in David Chazan, who's a journalist based there and was in the heart of the city at the time of the attack 10 years ago when 12 people were killed and was at the site within moments as well to cover it. Thanks so much for joining us, David. I guess, of course, today of all days, you're reminded of how things unfolded 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's right. That cold January morning, and we went out to the site very soon after the initial news flashes that something was happening at the offices. And initially, we didn't realize the magnitude of what had happened, because 4 years earlier, Charlie Hebdo's office had been firebombed, but no one had been hurt. And for the first few minutes, we thought it would be something similar again. And then we started to realize that these two brothers, the Kouachi brothers, had stormed into Charlie Hebdo's office with AK-47 assault rifles and gunned down 11 people at the office. And then as they fled, had killed a policeman in the street nearby. And the effect on France, I think, was comparable to that of 9/11 in the US. It was absolutely huge. At the time, it was the worst terror attack in France for more than 50 years, when included with an attack 2 days later on a kosher supermarket by an accomplice of the two gunmen who attacked the Charlie Hebdo office. But of course, it was slightly overshadowed 10 months later by the terrible Bataclan attacks in which 130 people were killed in a single night in Paris.
Mm. Do you think that it had a lasting effect? And of course, talking about freedom of speech in particular here, and the effect, if perhaps initially profound and strong, has it diminished at all a decade on or not?
Well, according to the director of Charlie Hebdo, which still publishes, he believes that liberals and left-wing politicians in France are now going a bit soft on freedom of expression because they're trying to win support among France's large Muslim minority. And I think public support is still fairly strong for the notion that you're allowed to mock religion just the same way that you're allowed to poke fun at politicians and other public figures. But according to a recent opinion poll, a majority of French people do still support that. But I think it has been somewhat nuanced, and critics of Charlie Hebdo have accused it of crossing the line into Islamophobia, which is something that its surviving journalists deny. But this is a publication that's always been provocative, that's always courted controversy. And soon after the attack 10 years ago, it did cause a degree of outrage. by poking fun first at the victims of an earthquake in Italy, and then at the people who had been killed in the crash of a Russian airliner in Egypt. So, you know, the boundary between good taste and what's acceptable in terms of satire is very personal. And I think Charlie Hebdo has come in for more criticism in recent years than it did in the immediate aftermath of the attack, when that phrase, "Je suis Charlie," I am Charlie, became a slogan of support at rallies, and used to see it on T-shirts and banners everywhere.
And just, David, I mean, this is really interesting to me reading about it, which I wasn't aware of. Where are their offices today, and what sort of security do they require?
Well, Charlie Hebdo journalists live under constant police protection, 24-hour bodyguards. They've moved their office, so they're no longer at the site that was attacked. And the address of their current office is not something that's made public. And we've been over and interviewed the staff there, so they will tell journalists where they are. You can visit them, but even when you speak to them for interviews, there are always police bodyguards present.
Yeah, quite amazing that to hear. And David, just very quickly wrapping things up, what's planned for today? Is President Macron involved, and is he behind it?
He is, yeah. There are 3 ceremonies we're beginning this morning. The first one will be led by President Macron, the Mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, at the site of the attack, the former officers. Then there will be another ceremony in a nearby street where a Muslim policeman who was standing guard at the office was gunned down at point-blank range. And later there'll be a third ceremony at the kosher supermarket that was attacked 2 days later.
David, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it. David Chazan for us from Paris, and we'll have much more of that live coverage throughout the day from Paris with Adam Parsons. We're going to take a quick break here on Sky News Today. When we come back, we'll have all of the day's top stories, and we'll be joined by Robert Jenrick at 9:15.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people.
Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised.
If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks. I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Good morning to you. It is 9 o'clock. Coming up on today's show, major incidents have been declared as severe flooding and further snow threatens to bring another day of chaos for people across the country.
Could olive oil be the future of British farming? We'll be speaking to one farmer who's making that bet.
And anger among Conservatives after the Prime Minister accused people of spreading lies over grooming gangs. We'll hear live from Shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenrick.
It's Tuesday, the 7th of January. Your headlines. Nearly 200 flood warnings remain in place across England this morning. An earthquake in Tibet kills at least 95 people and injures 130 others, according to Chinese state media. A crackdown on sexually explicit deepfakes could see predators face up to 2 years in jail. A polar vortex brings chaos to the US as 7 states declare emergencies in response to the winter storm. And France marks the 10th anniversary of the Charlie Hebdo attack with a series of memorials across Paris. A very good morning to you. Our top story, 181 flood warnings and 272 flood alerts remain in place across England this morning. A severe danger to life warning has also been issued for parts of northern Leicestershire as the UK continues to be battered by bad weather. Well, parts of the country have seen widespread travel chaos, some power cuts, and in places, children have needed to be rescued when stranded at school surrounded by floodwater. Let's bring in Sky's Alice Porter, who's here with me now. With the latest on this, Alice, in terms of how bad it is and the regional hotspots.
Yeah, there's a huge difference across the country. It's particularly bad in North Leicestershire. That's where we've got that severe flood warning where there's this danger to life. And the Environment Agency have put this in place because of the need potentially to evacuate multiple people. And indeed, yesterday, 59 people were rescued by Leicestershire Fire and Rescue Service. So the weather has really been impacting people, communities and services. I mean, if we look at, in terms of transport, Liverpool Airport has been temporarily closed for the snow to be cleared and for there to be de-icing to take place at the airport. We're waiting for updates for when it will be reopened. The rail lines, many rail lines are closed between Peterborough and Leicester. They've got all the rail lines are closed there, so it's hugely impacting our transport network. And then we've had, for the first time ever, East Midlands Ambulance Service. They've declared a critical incident. They declared that at 6 o'clock last night. Now, that's not just because of flooding. We've, of course, got the normal winter pressures. It's a difficult time of year for the NHS. But then on top of that, to have a situation where ambulances are really going to struggle to get to people in need, to get to those who are particularly vulnerable. That's why they've declared this critical incident. This is going to be a situation that's going to be really fast-moving for the next 24 hours.
Alice, as always, thanks so much. Good to see you. Now, at least 95 people have died after a strong earthquake hit Tibet in western China near to Nepal. The US Geological Survey said the magnitude 7.1 quake struck in an area close to the city of Shigatse in Tibet, near the border with Nepal, at a depth of about 6 miles. Let's get more now on this from our Asia correspondent, Nicole Johnson, who's been following the developments. And Nicole, the sadly rising death toll.
That's right. In the last couple of hours, we've had the death toll increase from around 50 to almost 100. And it's very likely that that will get even higher. Dozens of people are missing. Dozens of people have been injured. And it's happened in quite a wide area in the county of Tingri. Now, it's an isolated area. It is remote, but there are still some 27 villages there. Now, this earthquake happened around 9 a.m. in the morning. Chinese officials are saying that the magnitude is 6.8. In the US, they're putting it at 7.1, but it's certainly having a devastating effect in the region. Now, this is a mountainous region. This is the heartland of the Himalayas, effectively. And Everest Mountain is only around 50 miles from there. So the mountains there are 4,000 to 5,000 metres high. It's going to be a difficult area for officials and rescue crews to try and operate in. China is saying that 1,500 emergency workers have been sent there, and state media is saying that they're already starting to send filled beds and tents and emergency supplies. So clearly, as we can see from some of the footage that's coming in, houses, villages, businesses have all been destroyed, a huge amount of rubble, and the impact has also been felt outside of China, in India, in Bhutan, and also in Nepal, in its capital city, Kathmandu. So we'll wait and see what the death toll is, but as I said, it's likely to continue to keep rising.
Nicole, thanks so much for that. Nicole Johnson for us in Beijing. Now, the Prime Minister claims lies are being spread about grooming gangs by people who aren't interested in the welfare of the victims. This after Elon Musk accused Sir Keir Starmer of being complicit in the scandal. Serena is here with more on this story that rumbles on, Serena. And what were the key developments on it yesterday?
So yesterday, the Prime Minister directly defended himself against the smears that Elon Musk and other people had been attacking him online for. This was allegations that somehow he stood in the way of justice when he was DPP in tackling these grooming gangs. So he had a robust defence of that. He also said, he went further, he said that there needs to be an anchor of truth, that people need to... he needs to lead on standards in public life, and that's why he chose to do it, to stand up for himself. And he also threw smears at the Conservatives and Reform UK sort of implicitly by saying people who are jumping on the bandwagon are simply doing this to get attention. Now, this is obviously becoming a distraction from what the government wants to talk about. So yesterday he was trying to have a big press conference on the NHS. That was overshadowed by this. Today, the Safeguarding Minister was meant to talk about deep fakes. But of course, this is an issue that is completely overshadowing all of that. You asked the Safeguarding Minister on that today. This is what she said.
We have been in government for 6 months now, and I can hand on heart say that I have attended many meetings looking specifically at these ICSA recommendations, cross-government meetings chaired by Jess Phillips, the Safeguarding Minister. I've been attending as Victims Minister, and many of us are cross-government ministers looking at our different portfolios, how best to implement these recommendations. They're not easy to implement. Some of them can be done quickly, as the Home Secretary said yesterday, and we will be bringing forward new offences in our crime and policing bill. But some of them are more complicated. They will take time, but we are working to do just that.
So where this row rumbles on to next, I think, is on the national inquiry. The Conservatives are calling for that. They're trying to put in measures so the MPs can vote on a new national inquiry. Of course, we did have one. Alexis Jay looked into that. Now, she's actually said this morning that if it wasn't for Elon Musk, the government wouldn't be looking at this so quickly. That is quite an uncomfortable thing, although she does condemn people who are politicising that. But I think that's where you'll see the Conservatives go next with this. Interestingly, they've been a quite divided party. This is something they've now rallied behind. You've also got Nigel Farage tweeting this morning saying that if the government aren't going to fund a national inquiry, they will raise the funds to do that themselves. So I think this is where that row now goes.
Great stuff, Serena, as always. And as we mentioned earlier, we'll be talking to Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, about it shortly. But first of all, time for the day's other stories, and Leah's got those for us.
So much, Wilfred. We'll head to the United States first. At least 7 states have declared an emergency as a winter storm causes widespread chaos. Storm Blair has swept eastwards across the country, leaving what the National Weather Service call the heaviest snowfall in at least a decade. And extreme weather is forecast to continue for days. Sky's David Blevins has this report.
It's the worst winter storm to hit the United States in a decade, the Midwest bearing the brunt of the blizzard. The snow reached Washington, blanketing a region 30 states wide. That placed 60 million Americans under a weather alert, 7 states forced to declare an emergency. Hundreds of flights were either cancelled or delayed, and with train services disrupted too, the National Weather Service advised people to avoid all but essential travel. They're used to snow here in the capital, but not this amount of it. In most parts of the district, it's 6 inches deep. And some isolated areas are recording 12 inches. That's a foot of snow they're commuting through. That requires ingenuity. Some found a way to reach their destination, while others had their hands full making the most of the winter wonderland. There's a winter weather alert across 30 states, and here you are building a snowman. What inspired you to do that today?
Well, when snowing in DC, right?
We're both from Florida, and so this is like our first snow ever, and so we just needed to really take advantage of it.
I'm from California. We very rarely get snow, and so when I get snow, not by choice, I decide to have fun with it.
Honestly, it's been very nice, very peaceful. I don't mind it.
Get ready, charge! Let's go!
With federal government and schools shut, dozens faced off in what's become an annual tradition, countering the chill with a great snowball battle on Meridian Hill. David Blevins, Sky News in Washington.
Events will be held across Paris today, marking the 10th anniversary of the deadly attack on the Charlie Hebdo magazine. 12 people were killed. Let's cross live now to Sky's Europe correspondent, Adam Parson, who joins me now. This was a grim and a deadly period in modern France, Adam, and today a day of reflection.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. It is a decade ago since two brothers, the Kouachi brothers, who were born in France, of Algerian heritage, but have been radicalised and dedicated themselves to Al-Qaeda, stormed into the offices of the satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo and opened fire, killing 11 people. And today there will be events to remember those who died in that attack, also to remember a police officer who was killed outside, and also 4 people who were killed 2 days later in a kosher supermarket after that was held up by an accomplice of the Kouachi brothers. Emmanuel Macron, the president, will lead these tributes. He'll be accompanied by Anne Hidalgo, the mayor of Paris, as France remembers this period. It was the same year when the Bataclan attacks in Paris that day. Remember in November 2015 when 130 people were killed, many of them at the Bataclan, but also at nearby cafes and restaurants. Really grim period, terrible year for France. And I think amidst those tributes, amidst those memories of that awful time, there will also be questions about what has changed, what has learned, how has French society adapted, how has the world changed? Because, of course, there has been a gradual lull since that period in global terrorism, but we've seen recently a resurgence, including for Islamic State and Al-Qaeda. I think there has been that big question about the attack on Charlie Hebdo was seen, you remember all those people saying, Je suis Charlie. It was seen as an attack on free speech. And yet now in 2025, we are once again discussing that question about whether or not politicians are wary of criticising Muslim community, whether they're wary of addressing issues that led, some would say, to that kind of resurgence of Islamist terrorism. The Charlie Hebdo itself, the magazine, will be publishing more controversial images. And of course, remember that the precursor to these attacks was this magazine, Charlie Hebdo, publishing caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad that many found were profoundly insulting. So those questions around free speech, about libertarianism, are still resonating. And I think there are those who would now say that they are issues not just for left-wing magazines such as Charlie Hebdo, but also that are seized upon and taught much more by right-wing politicians and by agitators. And there will be those who also look at French society and say, were lessons learned? Was anything done to make it more inclusive, that its diversity, which is, in one hand, a great strength. This is a nation that has the biggest Muslim population, the biggest Jewish population in Europe. Has it come together more? And I think most of the evidence suggests it hasn't. Anti-Semitism, a root cause, according to then President Francois Hollande, of that attack on that kosher supermarket. I think it would be very hard for anyone to argue that anti-Semitism has become less of a problem in the intervening 10 years.
OK, Adam, for now, thank you. UK ambulance services are on course to report the highest ever rate of violent and abusive incidents against their staff. The Association of Ambulance Chief Executives says at least 55 paramedics are abused or attacked every day, with incidents including physical and verbal abuse, sexual assaults and serious attacks involving weapons. Donald Trump has lost his bid to postpone sentencing for his hush money conviction. The US president-elect's lawyers argue that his election victory should conclude the case, but a New York judge confirmed his sentencing will go ahead on Friday as scheduled. And still, giants Tata and British will join a new government council aimed at rebuilding the industry. It follows recent job losses and predictions of more as companies switch to greener furnaces. The council will also consult on how to spend £2 billion worth of investments.
Yeah, great stuff as always. Thank you. Well, Christmas, one of the busiest times of the year for shopping, but purses appear to have been tightened due to the cost of living crisis. Spending wasn't as high as retailers would have hoped. Let's get the numbers. Paul Kelso's got them for us. Hey, Paul.
Yeah, morning, Wilf. We've got a selection of readouts on the state of Christmas trading. Crucial time of year for the industry. The 3 months to December described as the golden quarter. Many retailers make most of their profits, if they've got any, in that time of the year. British Retail Consortium, which represents the retail industry, says that while sales were up 0.4% in the 3 months to December, dig below those numbers, and non-food sales were actually down 1.5%. They say that is a consequence of family budgets being managed more carefully because of the ongoing squeeze to the cost of living and a lack of consumer confidence. And they are equally pessimistic about the year to come. They say that consequences of the Chancellor's first budgets, particularly the increase in national insurance contributions that businesses are going to pay, as well as an increase to the minimum wage that many in the retail sector are paid, means they're going to have no choice but to increase prices, because of those costs in the coming year. Even perhaps the most successful retailer, Next, a great story they've had to tell over the last few years, they have increased their profit forecast this morning on the back of strong Christmas trading, but they say that to protect those margins, they foresee their prices increasing by 1% into the new year, and the speed of growth in the company is slowing as a result of the wider economic conditions. It is a different story, it should be said, though, when we come to food. Food was the area where retail sales did grow, and Kantar, which monitors that growth, have put out some numbers this morning as well. They say overall food spending grew 2.1% in the run-up in and around Christmas. So where we were spending money, it was on food and drink rather than on giving stuff to each other. And they've got a great number here. The average price of a Christmas shop was £460, a record high. But the average family made 17 separate shopping trips in December. That makes it the busiest month of shopping in food since March 2020, which was when we knew a lockdown was coming. And you can remember people were stockpiling then. This was a different kind of piling, pounds being piled on, I assume, but 17 shops in a single month. That may seem familiar to many.
Paul, great stuff. A striking statistic for sure. Paul Kelso there. Still to come here on The Breakfast Show. Up next, we'll be joined by the Shadow Justice Secretary, Robert Jenrick, and then we'll also be discussing the implications of Justin Trudeau's resignation.
Mayhem in the Middle East, rippling in America's West.
Get back! Get back!
The resolve of these protesters is now being seriously tested. I saw police being forced or pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests.
None of this is a peaceful protest.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. How are you feeling?
I am angry.
It is an anti-woman agenda. Sky News, get the full story first. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support, but it's nasty out there.
Can you beat Donald Trump, Governor? President Biden, do you trust President Xi? President Biden says that this meeting went well. He said real progress was made on a whole host of issues. Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
There's no doubt that Kamala Harris and her team are harnessing the power of social media. Do you think Kamala is brat?
Kamala's brat.
Are you scared?
Yeah, we were scared. It was terrible. Strong wind, building tearing down.
As them say, God works, so we can't do nothing.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. free wherever you get your news.
Excited. I've had severe nightmares of these people coming in and just taking me in the middle of the night.
Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
I'm James Matthews and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. Donald Trump, it would appear, is about to learn his fate. There's no doubting the strength of this hurricane as it roars through. Sky News, get the full story first. Do you fear a 4th indictment?
He's from Sky News. He's from Sky News. He's entitled to ask me questions.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. The Prime Minister's accused people of spreading lies about grooming gangs and claiming they aren't interested in the victims after Elon Musk accused Sir Keir Starmer of being complicit in the scandal. Let's get the thoughts of the Shadow Justice Secretary, Robert Jenrick, who's here with me now. Very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. So you and your party are calling for a full national statutory inquiry into this. Presumably that comes with some scale of acknowledgement that you should have initiated it yourselves while in government.
Well, look, we did do a great deal in government. Theresa May created the first reviews with Professor Alexis Jay that first shed light on this issue. Sajid Javid ensured that there is now mandatory data collection, including by ethnicity. And in particular, Suella Braverman in recent times created the Grooming Gangs Task Force, which led to 550 arrests and drafted the legislation that now Labour say that they will take forward, which will make it mandatory for public officials to report when they come across these instances and increase the sentences of those who are ultimately prosecuted for being grooming gang perpetrators. But this is still happening in our country. So, of course, all of us should do more. And that's why we need this full national inquiry. When Alexis Jay did her first inquiry, she only looked at 6 places. We now think this may be happening in 50 places across this country. That's why we've got to get to the truth. And Yvette Cooper yesterday, I think, made the case for us. She was asked by the Member of Parliament for Keighley, how many victims are there of this scandal in Bradford district? Yvette Cooper couldn't say. She didn't know. That's why we need the unvarnished truth.
But I mean, Alexis Jay's inquiry took 7 years. It cost £200 million and made 20 recommendations in 2022 when you were in government. Why didn't your government immediately implement all 20 recommendations?
Well, we did begin to do that. The 2 central recommendations, the mandatory reporting and the tougher sentences, were drafted. They were in the Criminal Justice Bill. Sadly, that bill fell away at the general election. Now it's going to go through Parliament with our fulsome support. We created the Grooming Gangs Task Force under Suella Braverman. So good work was done.
2 of 20?
Clearly, well, those are the 2 central recommendations. But clearly more needs to be done. And more information is coming to light with every passing day as a result of brave victims coming forward and good investigative journalists like Charlie Peters who are bringing this into the public domain. That is why we need now to have this full national inquiry. I think, frankly, it's inexplicable that Oldham Council asked the Labour government to conduct a review supported by the Home Office, and Yvette Cooper and Jess Phillips, the 2 ministers there, said no. Why wouldn't you want to get to the truth, to support the victims, to stop this ever happening again?
Well, but Alexis Jay said your government was weak in implementing some of these recommendations. At the same time, you're saying that this inquiry wasn't sufficient. Your government, your party's government, was the one that set the terms of it and commissioned it £200 million ago, 7 years into the reporting. And again, I ask you the extent to which you point the torchlight on yourselves. If you're waving and screaming about not enough being done by the current government, they've had 6 months in power. They've had 1 week of the light being shone on this by Elon Musk. You had 14 years.
Well, I think we all should reflect upon what we did or didn't do, because if today there are young girls who are victims of torture and rape anywhere in this country, quite clearly not enough has been done. That is why we need to take more action. But it's wrong to say that the last government didn't do work on this. It did. That's why we know more and more about this. But
why are you screaming about this now, though? Simply because Elon Musk...
No, absolutely not. I know the media is obsessed by Elon Musk's tweets. I'm not interested in that.
So why weren't you shouting about this before Christmas?
I was. I called for, last year, full life sentences for perpetrators.
You didn't call for a full inquiry because your government had carried one out, which only now you're saying
I wasn't interested in this. I was. My record speaks for itself. I called for full death sentences. I called for the immediate deportation of foreign national offenders who are perpetrators. No ifs, no buts. Get them out of this country. I said that cowardly officials and councillors who turned a blind eye should be prosecuted for their failure to take this seriously. And I was criticised for saying that and by making the quite clear, evident link to cultural issues by British Pakistanis, for example. When Suella Braverman, when we were in the Home Office together, called this out, she was castigated by the media for saying that. You know, we have been taking this seriously, but more needs to be done. I cannot understand why any member of Parliament, when this comes to a vote tomorrow, would not support a full national inquiry. Imagine if this was your child. Imagine if this was your granddaughter. You know, there are children being subjected to systematic rape and torture in our country right now. We've got to eradicate this.
So that might be the case, that the right answer going forward, and I'm not taking a position on this, might be a full statutory national inquiry. But this is a pretty simple question. You can try and list the things you did do or Suella Braverman did do. Should you, when you were in the Home Office, have called loud and clear for a full national statutory inquiry when you were in the Home Office?
Well, I think things have...
Why not?
Because I think things have developed significantly
because of
since
Elon
then.
Musk?
No, there's nothing to do with Elon Musk. I mean, honestly, I think that you need to get a grip. This is not about Elon Musk's tweets. I know the media are preoccupied by it. This is about children.
Why did you not...
I think it's about the vulnerable girls. We want to ensure that we get answers and accountability for the people who failed.
So if that is what is needed going forward, and it might well be the case, we're not taking a position on that, you have to acknowledge that you should have called for it yourselves.
No, because more and more information has come to light with every passing month as a result of good investor journalism, as a result of bravery from victims. There are now victims themselves calling for a full national inquiry. That is something that is more recent, and I cannot understand why we would ignore those calls. Let's give them what they deserve, which is that full national inquiry. We have that opportunity. That will be before Parliament tomorrow.
Again, I mean, I think it's clear for many people to see victims and their families have called for these things for a long period of time. One big thing has changed. It's got massive national attention. I also don't think it's a thing to be obsessed with in a negative way. If someone has changed the narrative, that's not a criticism. It's asking you a question about...
What brought this to light in recent days was the inexplicable decision by Yvette Cooper and Jess Phillips not to do a Home Office-led review into what happened in Oldham. I cannot understand why they would do that. And if we're going to do it in one community, why not do it for all of those communities across this country? Because we know this is happening, not just in Oldham, but in Rotherham, in Rochdale, in St Helens, in Middlesbrough, in Newcastle, in Banbury, in Aylesbury, in High Wycombe, in Ipswich. I could go on. In towns and cities the length and breadth of this country. Let's get the truth out there. That's what this national inquiry will enable us to do.
Of course.
And incidentally, it is not far right to call for this. That was an outrageous smear by Keir Starmer yesterday, which suggests he's learnt nothing from what has happened. He is trying to close down debate, precisely what got us into this mess in the first place. Alexis Jay said that weak and cowardly public officials turned a blind eye because they were fearful of being castigated, of being described as racist. And yet now, it's not just weak officials. You've got the Prime Minister himself going on national television to smear people and victims who are calling for a national inquiry and trying to close down the national debate on this most serious and grave issue.
Alexis Jay also said your implementation of her report was weak. And, of course, her inquiry was national and did take, 7 years to carry out. So there's some moving parts there. Just to move on, because we've only got a minute or two left on Elon Musk in particular. Do you think he gets Britain?
Why are you asking about Elon Musk?
He's the richest
Why
man in the world.
Why are you not asking about the young girls who are victims
We've just
of this
spent
scandal?
8 minutes on that.
Well, I'm not interested in Elon Musk. I'm interested
in
I
get to decide some of the topics that we talk about.
I don't think your viewers are interested in the tweets of Elon Musk. I think
a lot of people are fascinated by Elon Musk.
I think they care about the victims.
I'm fascinated by Elon Musk.
Well, I know you are. Much of the media are preoccupied by Elon Musk. The public care about the victims of this scandal, and they want to see action to tackle it.
And we've spoken about that. No, I'm not for a second suggesting that the victims of the scandal are not the most important thing that we've just discussed about. Do you acknowledge that we've spent 99% of this interview talking about that?
Well, you seem to want to talk about Elon Musk more than you do about victims of grooming gang scandals.
No, I think it's normal to expect in an interview to move on to a different topic, albeit a linked topic anyway, towards the end. I mean, again, I'm going to stand by that. Do you think he gets Britain?
I don't know. I believe in freedom of speech. I think that it's perfectly acceptable for anyone in this country or indeed around the world to be able to go onto a social media platform and make their views known within the confines of the law.
And Alexis Jay herself has said on BBC Radio today that she thinks that his comments have sped up the government's implementation of the 20 recommendations in her report that your government only focused on 2 of. So, again, you've denied that he's had anything to do with this, but many people would conclude from stepping back that he has changed the debate, but you seem to disagree with that. I think what's relevant here is the extent to which he might have shone a light on something and got it more attention, but also gone too far. And I'm interested in your takes on that. He said Jess Phillips is a rape genocide apologist. Is that too far?
Look, Jess Phillips is not that. That is not obviously acceptable or correct. But I do think that Jess Phillips is a hypocrite. You know, this is someone who has dedicated much of her political career to fighting for the victims of domestic abuse. And now she has the levers of power as a government minister, is asked by Oldham Council to provide the full support of the Home Office for a review into the most serious allegations of sexual abuse amongst young girls that we've known in this country for many years, perhaps in the modern history of our country, and she won't do it. Why? I cannot answer that question. You would have to ask her, you know, but I think that is hypocritical, weak and wrong.
And when she comes on, should she dictate the topics we talk about? And which questions I am allowed to ask and which questions I'm not allowed to ask?
But I'm simply saying that when we're facing one of the most serious scandals in our country's modern history, we should be focused on the victims, not on the tweets of an American billionaire.
Well, as was clear to anyone watching this, that was unquestionably the main focus of the interview. Robert Jenner, as always, thanks very much for joining us. Good to speak to you. We're going to take a quick break here on Sky News Breakfast. Up next, we'll talk about the latest in Canadian politics as Justin Trudeau resigns. Welcome back. The Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, has announced his resignation amid growing turmoil in his party. The 53-year-old has led the ruling Liberal Party since 2013 and the country since 2015, but has faced increasing calls to step down amid poor opinion polls and high-profile resignations. Here's our international correspondent, Diana Magnay.
And so, after 9 years as Prime Minister, a momentous announcement from Canada's Justin Trudeau.
Canadians deserve a real choice in the next election. And it has become obvious to me with the internal battles that I cannot be the one to carry the Liberal standard into the next election.
A familiar face on the international circuit, the longest standing of the current G7 crew. Justin Trudeau championed Ukraine, the climate and liberal values, which saw him come in with a strong mandate in 2015, but is not what voters want now.
It was an excellent conversation.
Especially not with Donald Trump threatening a 25% tariff on all Canadian goods and trolling the Canadian leader as just another governor of a US state. Trump tweeting on Truth Social after their meeting last month, "It was a pleasure to have dinner the other night with Governor Justin Trudeau of the great state of Canada. I look forward to seeing the governor again soon so that we may continue our in-depth talks on tariffs and trade." He grew up as Canadian political royalty, son of a revered Prime Minister, meeting the Queen first as a 5-year-old.
All the different sessions.
Yes, I will say you were much taller than me the last time we met.
But his political star could not outshine the economic crunch from COVID. And in December last year, the sudden resignation of his finance minister dealt a final blow. Chrystia Freeland charging the government in the face of Trump's trade threats with costly political gimmicks, which make Canadians doubt that we recognise the gravity of the moment. The opposition Conservatives now hold a huge lead in the polls. Justin Trudeau left with these words for his rivals.
Stopping the fight against climate change doesn't make sense. Backing off on the values and strength in diversity that Canada has always worked to pull itself together on is not the right path for the country.
But with his popularity in shreds, he has concluded that the political path forward is not for him to tread.
Do you think it's irresponsible to resign? Why not earlier?
Diana Magnay, Sky News.
Well, Trudeau's resignation comes as President Trump returns to the White House, of course, later this month, and his ally, Elon Musk, takes aim at British politicians. Meanwhile, Germany faces an election as well in the next couple of months. Let's discuss all of this and how it comes together with Dr. Georgios Samaros. He's an assistant professor of public policy at King's College London. Very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
So firstly, let's just cover off Canada in particular. They've got a general election due later this year. One of the reasons why Trudeau stepped down is because his party's polling so well. Does a change in leadership within his party, the centre-left party, give it a chance in the elections, or are they likely to lose the elections?
They're likely to lose the election. He has been facing mounting pressure for several years now, especially during the pandemic and the farmers' protests. So I would argue that Trump's pressure resulted in the resignation, but it's not the reason why he resigned. So no chance for them of winning the elections.
And again, if we snapshot in Germany, what's likely to play out there? And leading up to, I guess, the point of whether Keir Starmer as a centre-left leader will be a sort of rare thing by the end of the year.
Germany is also in uncharted waters because we don't know how the AfD is going to perform. With all of that promotion on social media and the push coming from Elon Musk primarily and his closest trolls on social media, I'm not sure what is next. However, with the union poised to win, there might be options to form a coalition government with the AfD. Nothing is off the table for now.
So bring it back to what all of this means for the UK. I mean, is it a big factor for Keir Starmer and the British government, or for most of the topics that the UK will be needing to discuss with the countries of the EU and of Canada as well? Does it not make a big difference that national identity is more important?
It does. Keir Starmer has not really taken a decisive stance on the allegations and, of course, the attacks from Elon Musk. He's trying, of course, to be more diplomatic at this stage because he knows that he cannot create enemies before the US presidency of Trump begins and, of course, before the German election. So they're trying to stabilize the situation, hoping that somehow the next government, especially in Germany, is not going to be a new enemy.
I guess on the flip side, the point you could say is that he's got 4.5 years in front of him with a very big majority. That's something of whatever political persuasion you have, many countries would dream of, many governments would dream of.
Still, his disapproval ratings are quite high. He has faced significant pressure after August. He hasn't been able to take a decisive stance on the issues related to Elon Musk. Look at the far-right protests back in August. And yesterday's statement, he didn't even name Elon Musk. Keir Starmer is quite weak right now, and I don't really know how he's going to survive this unless he takes that stance against the ones who are threatening his premiership.
What do you mean he's not going to survive this? I mean, he's not going to be removed from office in any way, or are you suggesting he is?
I don't think that he will be removed from office, but what about challenges within his own party? There is, I would argue, some issues that are quite prickly, and without Keir Starmer, of course, able to find a clear messaging against those threats, I'm not sure how he's going to deal with the opposition as well. I just saw Robert Jenrick talking about this, and they're trying to capitalize on every single issue that has been basically in the agenda of the far right. I'm not sure how that messaging is going to play out when Keir Starmer looks so weak.
Interesting. I guess the maths would suggest the opposite, that he's not particularly weak, whatever the news stories of the day. Georgia, thanks so much for joining us. Very good to see you.
Thank you.
Now, Europe is set for a colder than usual January, which means households across the continent could be forced to endure higher gas prices. It's burning through its reserves faster than at any point in the last 7 years. And the closure of another pipeline from Russia means supplies are unlikely to be replenished anytime soon. Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, takes a look at the changing energy map.
Now, I realise gas prices, it's probably the last thing you want to talk about right now in the height of winter. But we do need to talk about what's going on in Russia, Ukraine with gas, because it's a big deal and it's going to affect us because we are all part of the same market. Even though we're not directly taking any Russian gas, what goes on here affects all of us. And if you just look at where gas typically comes from in Europe, some of it comes in on tankers, so LNG tankers, liquefied natural gas. Some of it's produced domestically, a lot of it in the North Sea, some of it in the UK. Some comes from Norway, so other pipelines, also from North Africa. But Russia, a lot of it historically has come from Russia. And if you just look at European gas, and this is a big deal because it goes into industry as well as going into our boilers, that red part there is Russian gas. And you're talking about 37% of European gas before the invasion of Ukraine. That's the rest of the stuff we're talking about, kind of domestic and Norwegian stuff. And if you look at the change, that's this year here. If you look at the change, that's down by 67%. So a massive fall, whereas the rest of the stuff has stayed more or less the same. But I want to show you this in particular, if we're going to zoom in on Russian pipeline gas, because that's also changing. It's changing. And when I talk about Russian pipeline, there's actually quite a few different pipelines that historically have been built coming into Europe. And it's worth just going through some of them because there's big stories and this is emerging as well. First of all, Yamal. This is a pipeline that goes through Belarus. That was sanctioned in 2022, so that's basically gone. We can kind of knock that off. Actually, flow stop in 2021. Nord Stream as well, as you probably saw, that was destroyed, or parts of it were destroyed in 2022, so that's gone as well. That was the biggest of all of the pipelines into Europe, which leaves the biggest remaining is the Ukraine pipelines. And that's where the news is. They have now stopped, OK? So this whole chunk here, it's actually already kind of lower than that. But historically, that's how big it was. That is also going to be gone. And that is going to be a concern for places like Slovakia, places like Austria as well, which are at the end of that pipeline. And we are now reliant, essentially, for pipeline gas from Russia just on this Turk stream, which is relatively small. And it means that Europe is going to have to dig further into its storage. Now, this is showing you the average amount of gas that we have on the continent stored. And let's compare it with where we are now. So this is 2024. And look, whereas we had quite a high level of gas, that you can see it always goes down in the winter, we build it back up over the summer, that is now falling very fast, so that we're starting this year with the lowest level of storage that we've had in quite some time. Put all of that together, so the storage situation, what's going on with pipeline gas from Russia, and that helps explain why wholesale prices, which feed into the prices we all pay, are now up to the highest level since April 2023. Those are wholesale prices in the Netherlands. But some context here. Zoom out, and you can see that even though they're high, we are still a long way away from where it was at the peak of the energy crisis.
Ed Conway there on the prices of gas. After the break, we're going to talk about the prices of olive oil and why some British farmers are now trying to produce their own. We'll be right back.
Mayhem in the Middle East, rippling in America's West.
Get back! Get back!
The resolve of these protesters is now being seriously tested. I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests.
None of this is a peaceful protest.
I'm Martha Kellner, and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. How are you feeling?
I am angry.
It is an anti-woman agenda. Sky News, get the full story first. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support, but it's nasty out there.
Can you beat Donald Trump, Governor? President Biden, do you trust President Xi? President Biden says that this meeting went well. He said real progress was made on a whole host of issues. Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
There's no doubt that Kamala Harris and her team are harnessing the power of social media. Do you think Kamala is brat?
Kamala's brat.
Are you scared?
Yeah, we were scared. It was terrible. Strong wind, building tearing down.
As them say, our God works, so we can't do nothing.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. Free, wherever you get your news.
Excited. I've had severe nightmares of these people coming in and just taking me in the middle of the night.
Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised.
If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Welcome back. A third-generation farmer is hoping to put British-made olive oil on our supermarket shelves. Peter Thompson hopes to emulate British wineries and take advantage of longer, warmer summers. Joining me now is Pete Thompson, who is taking on olive farming here in the UK. Thanks so much for joining us. When did you make this switch?
The first olives went in the ground back in 2018. I think sort of the start of the process, decision making, etc., probably back in 2016.
And what drove it? I mean, we mentioned the weather, I guess, making it possible. Is olive prices been going up in recent years as well?
It wasn't price driven, actually. It goes back to certain David Cameron deciding we're going to have a referendum back in 2016, and Charlie Hodges of Bellazoo then said to me, jokingly, well, when we get kicked out of the EU, you'll have to start growing olives for us in the UK. And sure enough, here we are. I don't think we'll be able to help with the price just yet. We're not going to be a big volume producer like the Spanish.
Pete, it's Leah here in the studio too. Great to see you. I'm all for this. I'm going to lay my cards on the table right now. Whenever you go into the supermarket, olive oil is very, very expensive. When can we expect results from this? Because I imagine it will take a good few years.
Well, we've been picking olives and curing them, preserving them for table for a while. So we know we can grow them. The lab shows that we've got enough oil in the olives. But you need a bit of volume to start creating oil. So, our oldest trees are 7 years old now. And we're unfortunately, we're still talking kilos rather than tons. So I've tasted a little bit. Some samples have gone off to Sarah Wolfstan, who's a olive oil sommelier in the UK and has been very, very helpful to us in our journey. So when we get it right, when we've got extra virgin and we've got enough volume to start sending it out, hopefully within a couple of years.
Obviously, in recent years, in particular, British-made wines and sparkling wines in particular are now as well-priced, if not more expensive, than some of the best French and continental-made varieties. Is that what you're hopeful of, i.e. that British olive oil will be seen as a premium quality product, or is it more, you mentioned Brexit there, that you can undercut the imported rivals on price in due course?
No, it's absolutely about quality. We want to create an extra virgin olive oil and compete with the best. The UK horticulture, that is a high cost production sort of sector. So we're not going to be competing with your mass market oils, but we are going to be aiming for the top of the market and trying to copy some of that growth that we've seen in the UK sparkling wine.
And Pete, what about the future for you? I mean, in farming, it's all about adaptation, isn't it? Do you have your eye on anything else?
I think we were asked the question about olives originally because we've always done a lot of diversification and innovation here. So we've got a track record of developing new crops. For us here now, the field scale production of veg isn't really viable anymore. So we're looking at a more extensive way of producing food alongside habitat restoration, so creating or restoring habitats for natural capital like biodiversity, carbon, water, but then also including some high quality production of things like olives and maybe some other tree fruit in due course.
What are your colleagues and peers doing? Are you the first mover on this to make British olive oil, or are others seeing similar trends and pressures and opportunities as you are and following suit?
I think we're the first people to do the olives commercially in the UK. I know someone else has planted a few since. There's people, we're having to look at different options. The world has changed for us, particularly in sort of horticulture, vegetable and fruit production in the UK, plus the ever more variable climate, albeit slightly warming. So, yeah, change is happening, and it's happening pretty fast on the ground.
And just lastly, Pete, when it comes to olive oil, you must be a bit of a connoisseur. What's the best sort of flavours that you can expect?
Well, we've been helped massively by Belazou, by other olive growers, so Alluviu, Sicily, Pons, the Pons family out in Catalonia. From my initial tastings here, we've got something that's really lovely and fresh and grassy, but it certainly has those bitter notes that you want from a good quality olive oil that's got all those sort of health benefits of high polyphenols.
Pete, when will it be ready to try, and can you bring it in?
Give us a year. You bring the bread in, and I'll bring a bit of oil.
OK, brilliant. We'll get some. I think we'll probably stick with French bread to dip into it, rather than British bread.
You never know. A bit of wild farm bread wouldn't do any harm.
Well, can you source us some good British bread as well? Either way, when the olive oil's ready, we'd love to maybe do a little bit of a blind tasting. It'd be good fun.
We'll be in. I'll bring the oil. I'll get Andy Cato of Wild Farm to bring a bit of his sourdough.
Fantastic. Well, Pete, thanks for joining us. I think it sounds very, very interesting indeed. Pete Thompson there.
No problem at all.
Olive, that's made me really hungry.
I know, that's definitely a day in the diary, and we'll get some English champagne and we'll be set.
Yeah. Brilliant. All things English, particularly alcohol-based. Why not? Sounds good to me, although I'm not sure we're allowed to do that. We're allowed olive oil and bread on the breakfast show.
We have had champagne on this show
Yeah,
numerous times.
never when I'm on.
OK, we need to sort this for the end of the week, yeah?
We're going to have a very quick look at the weather as we leave you. Of course, it has been chilly, it's been wet, and it's been snowy as well. And the weekend's rain and snow has moved on to a northerly flow. It should last all week, and wintry showers and extensive frosts are likely. There's also a severe frost in the north and wintry showers and icy stretches mainly in the north and the west. Well, that's the weather. There's going to be much more, of course, on the broader flood situation on Sky News today with Gareth Barlow up next. Gareth will also have all of the very latest coming out of Paris on that Charlie Hebdo 10-year anniversary. That does it for us on Breakfast. Thanks for watching.
I'm James Matthews, and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. Donald Trump, it would appear, is about to learn his fate. There's no doubting the strength of this hurricane as it roars through. Sky News, get the full story first. Do you fear a fourth indictment?
He's from Sky News. He's from Sky News. He's entitled to ask me questions.